Hello, dear traveler. Welcome. Settle yourself somewhere comfortable tonight. Perhaps you're wrapped in blankets, or maybe you're lying beneath the weight of a gentle quilt as the day finally releases its hold on you. Whatever brought you here, to this quiet moment, I'm glad you've arrived. Tonight, we're going to journey together into the oldest forests of the Slavic world, where the birch trees grow so thick that sunlight barely touches the forest floor, and where, if you listen carefully, you might hear the distant sound of something moving through the woods on legs that were never meant to walk. We're going to explore the complete story of Baba Yaga, not the simplified version you might know from children's books, where she's simply a witch or simply a villain, but the full, complex, ancient figure who has lived in the imaginations of Slavic peoples for longer than anyone can truly remember. We'll trace her origins back through time, wander through the many regional variations of her tales, discover the symbols that surround her, and explore how her presence still echoes in everyday life across Eastern Europe and beyond. But first, let's begin with the sound that announces her arrival. Close your eyes if you'd like, and imagine it. A distant rumbling growing closer, the crack and groan of tree trunks bending, and then you see it through the silver birch forest, moving impossibly fast. It's a mortar, the kind used to grind grain, large enough to hold a person, and it's flying. Inside it sits an old woman, wielding the pestle not to grind but to steer through the air, and in her other hand a broom made of silver birch switches, sweeping away every trace of her passage so no one can follow where she's been. This is Baba Yaga, and tonight we have all the time in the world to truly know her. Part 1. The Ancient Origins of a Forest Goddess. Let's go back, far back, to a time before the tales were written down, before Alexander Afanasyev collected Russian folk stories between the 1850s and 1860s, giving us the versions we often know today. His collection was published in volumes from 1855 through the early 1860s, though some editions continued into 1867. Before Ivan Bilibin created his hauntingly beautiful illustrations around 1900, his famous Baba Yaga illustrations appeared between 1899 and 1902. Back to when these stories were told around fires and wooden houses, when winter pressed against the walls and the forest outside held mysteries that felt very real indeed. The first recorded mention of Baba Yaga in writing appears in Mikhail Lomonosov's Russian grammar book from 1755. It's a curious place for a witch to make her literary debut, isn't it? But this tells us something important. By the mid-18th century, Baba Yaga was already so well known, so thoroughly embedded in the Russian language and consciousness, that she could be referenced alongside other figures from Slavic tradition. In Lomonosov's grammar, she's mentioned twice, and notably appears in a list comparing Slavic gods and beings with their Roman counterparts, though significantly, Baba Yaga is listed without an equivalent, suggesting even then she was recognized as uniquely Slavic, uniquely herself. But she existed long before that written reference. The oral traditions that kept her alive stretch back centuries before 1755, perhaps even millennia. Many scholars suggest that Baba Yaga's roots could reach all the way back to pre-Christian Slavic mythology, to a time when the Slavic peoples worshipped a pantheon of nature deities who embodied the forces of the world around them. In these ancient times, the figure we now know as Baba Yaga might have been something quite different. Some researchers have proposed that she was originally a goddess of death and regeneration, a powerful feminine deity who presided over the cycle of life itself. In pre-Indo-European matrilineal cultures, before the rise of patriarchal structures, such a goddess would have been deeply respected, perhaps even central to religious practice. This interpretation draws on the fact that Baba Yaga shares characteristics with other ancient goddesses associated with death, transformation, and the underworld. Think about what that means. Before she became the frightening witch of fairy tales, before she was the one who threatened to eat children or placed impossible tasks before heroes, Baba Yaga might have been the one people turn to at the most important transitions of life: birth, the passage into adulthood; death, the promise of rebirth and renewal. She would have been the guardian of these thresholds, the one who understood that life and death are not opposites, but partners in an eternal dance. At least, this is what patterns in the folklore suggest. Her connection to thresholds, transformations, and the boundary between worlds all point towards such an ancient role. Her name itself holds mysteries that scholars continue to debate. The word Baba in Slavic languages typically means grandmother or old woman, though in modern Russian it has taken on a somewhat derogatory tone, meaning simply woman in an unflattering way. But the original meaning carries warmth. Baba, babushka, grandmother. In Russian, Polish, and Czech, the word also carried meanings of midwife, fortune teller, and sorceress. A woman who held knowledge, a woman who could see beyond the ordinary world. The second part of her name, Yaga, is even more mysterious and contested. Different sources suggest it could mean snake or serpent. In some Slavic languages,
it might derive from horror or relate to terms meaning wood nymph or evil woman. Some etymologists believe it's connected to the Slavic name Jadwiga, while others point to the Russian verb yagat, which means to find fault or to abuse. Still others suggest the name might not even be Slavic in origin, but borrowed from Finnish Ugric peoples, Turkic languages, or indigenous Siberian tribes. What's fascinating is that all these potential meanings tell us something. Snake, horror, serpent, grandmother, midwife, fortune teller, one who finds fault. Baba Yaga contains all of these things. She is not a simple character, easily defined. She holds within her the power to help and the power to harm. She is as complex as nature itself, as unpredictable as the seasons, as necessary as death, and as generous as spring. In the early Slavic worldview, the world was divided into three realms. There was Prav, the realm of the gods and higher spirits. There was Yav, the world of the living, the everyday reality where humans dwelt. And there was Nav, the underworld, the realm of the dead and ancestral spirits. Baba Yaga, many scholars believe, existed at the boundary between these worlds. She lived in Nav, but she could be reached from Yav. She was the guardian of the threshold, the one who controlled the passage between life and death. This would explain why her home, which we'll explore in much more detail later, is described as standing at the edge of the forest, at the border between the civilized world of villages and the wild, untamed forest beyond. She exists in liminal space, in the between places, and that's where transformation happens. That's where one version of yourself dies and another is born. There's another theory about Baba Yaga's origins that's particularly compelling. The noted Russian folklorist Vladimir Prop, who studied the morphology of folktales extensively in the early 20th century, suggested that Baba Yaga was connected to ancient initiation rites. In many traditional societies, young people, especially boys, would undergo initiation ceremonies when they came of age. These ceremonies often involved a symbolic death and rebirth. The initiate would be taken away from the village, would undergo trials and tests, and would return transformed into an adult. Prop proposed that Baba Yaga represented the priestess or elder who presided over these ceremonies. Her threatening nature, her tests, her dwelling place in the forest away from civilization, her very role in the stories as someone who must be approached with proper preparation and purity of spirit, all of these elements mirror the structure of initiation rites. When a hero or heroine in a fairy tale visits Baba Yaga and survives her tests, they return changed. They have passed through a symbolic death and emerged on the other side, wiser, stronger, more capable. This reading of the tales helps explain patterns that appear repeatedly in the stories. This interpretation helps explain why Baba Yaga is both terrifying and helpful, both villain and guide. In initiation ceremonies, the elder's role is not to be nice or comforting. It's to challenge, to test, to push the initiate to their limits so they can discover their true strength. The elder must sometimes seem cruel to be truly kind. They must allow the old self to die so the new self can emerge. Some scholars have also drawn connections between Baba Yaga and other ancient figures from world mythology. They see echoes of her in various death goddesses and underworld figures from other cultures. The Greek Persephone, who descends to the underworld and returns, marking the seasons. The Hindu goddess Kali, who destroys and creates, who wears a necklace of skulls and dances the dance of cosmic destruction and renewal. The Germanic Perchta, an old woman who appears during the 12 days of Christmas and can be either terrifyingly vengeful or surprisingly generous, depending on how people have behaved. These connections suggest that Baba Yaga might be part of a much older, deeper archetype. The crone, the dark mother, the wise woman who knows the secrets of death and is therefore also the guardian of life. In the triple goddess concept found in many ancient religions, there is the maiden, representing youth and potential. There is the mother, representing fertility and the prime of life. And there is the crone, representing wisdom, endings, and the accumulated knowledge of a lifetime. Baba Yaga embodies this crone aspect perfectly, though we should be careful not to claim direct lineage. Rather, she may represent a similar archetype that emerged independently or from shared ancient roots. Interestingly, in some of the oldest tales, Baba Yaga isn't described as particularly old or ugly at all. In some versions, she can appear as a young woman. In others, there are 3 Baba Yagas who are sisters, ranging in age from young to old. This triple aspect appears throughout her mythology. In the famous tale Vasilisa the Beautiful, which we'll explore more fully later, there are 3 pairs of disembodied hands that serve Baba Yaga and 3 mysterious riders who pass by, one white, one red, and one black, representing dawn, day, and night. The number 3 echoes through her stories like a drumbeat, connecting her to ancient concepts of the triple goddess and the cycle of time itself. But we should also consider the historical context in which these tales evolved. When Christianity came to the Slavic lands, beginning around the 9th and 10th centuries, it didn't simply replace the old beliefs overnight. Instead, there was a long period of syncretism, where Christian and pagan elements mixed and blended. Old gods were sometimes transformed into saints. Old goddesses were reimagined as demons or witches. This is likely what happened to Baba Yaga, a figure who might once have been revered as a goddess of nature, death, and rebirth, gradually became more sinister in the retellings. Her power remained, but now it was viewed with suspicion and fear rather than respect. She became a cautionary figure, a villain in stories designed to teach children lessons about obedience and the dangers of straying too far from home and hearth. Yet, even as Christianity reshaped the stories, Baba Yaga never became simply evil. Unlike the Christian concept of the devil or demons who are purely malevolent, Baba Yaga remained ambiguous. She kept her complexity. In some stories, she's clearly the antagonist, kidnapping children or creating obstacles for the hero. But in others, she's the one who provides crucial help, who gives the hero the magical object or knowledge they need to succeed. She tests, yes, but she also teaches. She threatens, but she also transforms. This ambiguity is perhaps her most defining characteristic, and the reason she has remained so compelling across the centuries. Baba Yaga refuses to be easily categorized. She is not simply good or evil, helpful or harmful, human or supernatural. She is all of these things at once. She is, fundamentally, like nature itself, which can be both nurturing and destructive, which brings both life-giving rain and devastating storms, which offers both summer's abundance and winter's harsh scarcity. Part 2. The iconic symbols and dwelling place. Now that we've traced Baba Yaga back through the mists of time, let's turn our attention to the symbols that surround her, the objects and places that have become inseparable from her identity. These aren't mere decorative details. Each one carries layers of meaning, accumulated over centuries of storytelling. Let's begin with her most famous possession, the one that appears in nearly every tale about her. Her house, her izbushka. But this is no ordinary dwelling. This is a house that stands on chicken legs, giant chicken legs, scaled and clawed, that allow the house to move through the forest, to walk and turn, and even dance. Imagine it. You're walking through a birch forest, the white bark of the trees glowing in the dimming light. The air is cool and still. And then you hear it, a creaking, groaning sound, the snapping of branches, and through the trees you see a wooden house, probably no larger than a peasant's cottage, tilting and swaying as it walks on two enormous chicken legs. The house turns, and you see that it has no windows facing you. Its back is toward you. To see the door, to gain entry, you must speak the words, little house, turn your back to the forest and your front to me." Why chicken legs? There are several theories, and, as with everything about Baba Yaga, the truth probably contains elements of all of them. The most practical explanation comes from the Finno-Ugric peoples and other northern forest dwellers. In these regions, people built storage houses raised on stumps to keep food and supplies safe from animals and moisture. When trees were cut down, the stumps left in the ground, with their roots still attached, could look remarkably like legs, especially in the imagination of someone glimpsing them through forest shadows. These raised storage houses could be moved by uprooting the stumps and replanting them in a new location. Over time, in the realm of folklore, these practical structures might have been transformed into a house that could walk. Some scholars point to examples of such structures still preserved in museums, like Skansen. But there's also symbolic meaning here. Chickens and birds in general have long been associated with the underworld and with death in Slavic mythology. Birds can fly, can move between earth and sky, between the living world and the realm beyond. Chickens specifically were sometimes used in ritual sacrifices. The chicken legs on Baba Yaga's house mark it as belonging to the otherworld, to Nav, the realm of the dead. They signify that this is not a house of the living world, no matter how much it might resemble one. The movement of the house is also significant. It can turn. It spins. In some versions, it spins continuously until commanded to stop. This spinning motion connects to the cycles of time, to the turning of the seasons, to the rotation of the earth itself. Some scholars have suggested that the spinning house, with its 12 fence posts surrounding it, represents the 12 months of the year, the wheel of time eternally turning. Baba Yaga's dwelling is time itself, endlessly moving, never quite in the same place twice. The fact that the house has its back turned initially is also meaningful. It represents the barrier between worlds. You cannot simply walk up to Baba Yaga's door. You must know the proper words, the proper ritual approach. You must ask permission. This is the threshold moment, the point where the ordinary world ends and the magical, dangerous, transformative world begins. To turn the house around is to open the door between worlds. It's a moment that requires respect, knowledge, and courage. Now, surrounding this walking house is a fence. But this is not a fence to keep out rabbits or mark property boundaries. This fence is made of human bones, posts of long bones topped with skulls. In some versions, each skull has eye sockets that glow at night, illuminating the forest around Baba Yaga's home like grotesque lanterns. Often, there's one post without a skull, one empty space, and the implication is clear. That's where your skull will go if you fail Baba Yaga's tests. The fence of bones is perhaps the most overtly frightening element of Baba Yaga's iconography, and it's meant to be. This is a warning. This is a clear statement. Many have come here before you, and many have not left. This place is dangerous. Death is present here. The threshold you're about to cross is real, and there's no guarantee you'll cross back. But again, let's look deeper at what this might symbolize. In shamanic traditions and in many ancient cultures, bones were not just symbols of death, they were also symbols of essential self, of what remains when everything else is stripped away. Bones are structure, foundation, truth. When a shaman in traditional societies underwent their initiation, it was often described as being torn apart, reduced to bare bones, and then reassembled. The bones were the part that had to remain for reconstruction to be possible. Following this interpretation, Baba Yaga's fence of bones might not just be a trophy collection of victims. It might represent the essential selves of all those who have passed through her domain, all those who have undergone transformation in her presence. She is the keeper of bones, the one who knows what remains when everything else is burned away. Whether this was the original intent or a later symbolic reading, it deepens our understanding of her role as a transformer, rather than merely a destroyer. Inside the house, if you're brave or foolish enough to enter, you'll find other unsettling details. There's an enormous stove, a pech, that stretches from one side of the house to the other. This is where Baba Yaga cooks. This is where, in some tales, she threatens to roast and eat her visitors, particularly children. When she's not using the stove for cooking, she lies on top of it, stretched out, her long nose touching the ceiling, her body filling the entire hut, corner to corner. The stove is another deeply symbolic element. In traditional Russian peasant homes, the stove was the heart of the house. It provided heat in brutal winters, it cooked food, and the top of the stove was a sleeping place, the warmest spot in the house. The stove represented survival, comfort, home itself. But the stove was also associated with transformation. Raw food goes in and emerges cooked, transformed by fire into something nourishing. In various initiation rites across cultures, the symbolic death often involved passing through fire or being cooked. The initiate enters as one thing and emerges as another, or so anthropologists have interpreted these rituals. When Baba Yaga threatens to cook someone in her oven, she's threatening transformation. Whether that transformation is death or rebirth, whether the person will emerge at all or be consumed entirely, depends on how they face the challenge. This reading of the oven as a transformative space, rather than simply an instrument of death, helps explain why protagonists who approach Baba Yaga correctly often survive what should be fatal encounters. The hut is also said to be served by invisible servants, 3 pairs of disembodied hands that appear when Baba Yaga calls them to do her bidding. They take food, they perform tasks, but they never show themselves fully. These servants represent the hidden forces at work in transformation, the things that happen below the surface of consciousness.
When we undergo change, whether we choose it or it's forced upon us, there are processes happening within us that we can't see or fully understand. The invisible hands are those hidden processes of growth and change. Now let's talk about Baba Yaga's primary mode of transportation, which is as distinctive as her house. She flies through the air in a mortar, using the pestle as a rudder or to row with, and she carries a broom made of silver birch with which she sweeps away all traces of her passage. A mortar and pestle were common household items in traditional Slavic homes, used to grind grain and herbs.
They were tools of the kitchen, of women's work, of the domestic sphere. But in Baba Yaga's hands, these ordinary domestic implements become vehicles of power and flight. This transformation of the mundane into the magical is quintessentially Baba Yaga. She takes the tools of everyday life and reveals their hidden potential. But there's more to it than that. The mortar and pestle, the act of grinding, had deep symbolic significance. Grinding grain was one of the most essential tasks for survival. The mortar, hollow and receptive, and the pestle, long and active, have been interpreted by some scholars as symbols of feminine and masculine principles, of the creative forces of the universe. Together they represented the union of opposites that create life itself. The mortar was sometimes associated with the womb, the place of gestation and birth. The pestle, entering and pounding, was the generative force, though we should note this is scholarly interpretation rather than explicit folklore. So when Baba Yaga flies in a mortar, she's riding in what could be seen as a symbol of life-giving transformation. She's inside the womb of creation itself. The act of grinding was also transformative, taking whole grain and breaking it down into flour, destroying one form to create another that can nourish. Once again, we see Baba Yaga associated with the processes of death and rebirth, destruction and creation, breaking down and building up. The broom she uses to sweep away her tracks is made of silver birch. Birch trees are especially significant in Russian and Slavic culture. These white-barked trees grow abundantly in Russian forests, and they've always been associated with purity, with spirits, with the connection between the earthly and spiritual realms. Birch branches were used in ritual cleansing in Russian bathhouses. Birch trees appear repeatedly in folk songs and poetry as symbols of Russian identity itself. By sweeping away her tracks with a birch broom, Baba Yaga is erasing evidence of her passage, making herself impossible to follow. This speaks to her connection with the mysteries, with knowledge that cannot be easily pursued or obtained. But the act of sweeping is also cleansing. She's not just hiding her path, she's purifying it, removing any trace of her presence from the world she moves through. This ability to pass through without leaving a mark, to touch the world and yet remain apart from it, is another expression of her liminal nature, her existence between worlds. There are also the three riders, the horsemen who serve Baba Yaga. These appear most famously in the tale of Vasilisa the Beautiful, and they are among the most striking images in all of Slavic folklore. The first rider appears at dawn. He is dressed entirely in white, his clothing white, his horse white, even his horse's tack white. As he rides past, the first light of day breaks across the sky. This is the White Rider, and he represents day, the bright dawn, the coming of light. At noon, a second rider appears. He is dressed in red, riding a red horse with red trappings. As he passes, the sun reaches its zenith, blazing in full strength. This is the Red Rider, representing the sun at its height, the full power of day. As evening falls, a third rider comes. He is dressed all in black, his horse black, everything about him the color of night. As he rides past, darkness falls. This is the Black Rider, representing night, midnight, the absence of light. When Vasilisa in the story asks Baba Yaga about these riders, the old woman explains that they are my bright dawn, my red sun, and my dark midnight. These are her servants, under her command. What this tells us is that Baba Yaga has power over time itself, over the cycles of day and night. She commands the progression of hours. She is not just old or outside of time. She is the one who controls time's passage. This is an extraordinary claim of power. Time is the one force that no mortal can resist or control. We are all subject to time's flow. We age, we change, we move inexorably from birth toward death, and there is nothing we can do to stop it.
But Baba Yaga stands outside this rule. She commands the very forces that govern human existence. The writers are a reminder that she is not subject to the same laws as mortals. She is other. She is beyond. Interestingly, Baba Yaga also tells Vasilisa that she can answer questions about the writers. But if Vasilisa asks about the invisible servants, about the hands, Baba Yaga will eat her. There are some mysteries that can be spoken of, and others that must remain hidden. Time can be discussed, but the inner workings of transformation, the deep magic of how things change, that knowledge is too dangerous for the unprepared. In some regional variations, particularly in Polish folklore, Baba Yaga's house is described differently. Instead of 2 chicken legs, it has only one. This one-legged house spins around and around on its single support, even more unstable, even more clearly otherworldly. The one-legged aspect might connect to other one-legged beings in mythology, often associated with the otherworld and with shape-shifting. It emphasizes the house's impossible nature, the way it defies the normal laws of physics and reality.
Baba Yaga herself is often described with what the Russian tales call kostyanaya noga, a bony leg, or sometimes more specifically a leg of bone or clay. Some scholars believe this might originally have been a mistranslation or evolution of a term meaning one leg, connecting Baba Yaga to other one-legged supernatural beings. Others believe the bony leg is meant to show that Baba Yaga is partially of the realm of death. The part of her is already skeletal, already beyond life. Her physical appearance in the tales is almost always unsettling. She is described as incredibly old, though in some versions she can appear younger. She's tall, gaunt, bony, with a long nose that reaches the ceiling when she lies in her hut. She has iron teeth, sometimes just teeth described as sharp, capable of grinding bones. Her appearance is meant to inspire fear, to mark her as other, as not fully human, despite her human form. But again, let's consider what this means symbolically. The crone, the old woman with the iron teeth and bony frame, is a figure who has been stripped of softness, of conventional beauty, of all the things that society values in women. She represents a stage of life, particularly for women, when they are no longer valued for fertility or conventional attractiveness. But in gaining this freedom from expectation, the crone also gains power. She has nothing left to lose. She no longer needs to be pleasing or careful. She can speak hard truths. She can be frightening. She can take up space in a way she might not have been permitted to when she was younger. Baba Yaga's iron teeth are also significant. Iron was a relatively late material to come to much of the Slavic world, representing new technology, strength, the ability to shape the world. But iron was also believed to have power against spirits and magic. In many traditions, iron can ward off supernatural beings. For Baba Yaga to have iron teeth means she has incorporated this protective, powerful material into herself. She cannot be warded away by iron because she has made it part of her being. Part 3. Regional variations across the Slavic world. Baba Yaga's story is not just Russian, though Russia is where we find the most famous and well-documented versions of her tales. She appears throughout the Slavic world, and in each region she takes on slightly different characteristics, different names, different roles that reflect local beliefs and customs. The Slavic world is vast, stretching from Poland in the west to Russia in the east, from the Baltic states in the north to the Balkans in the south. Within this enormous geographic and cultural space, Baba Yaga has been reshaped and reimagined countless times, like water taking the shape of different vessels. In Poland, she is known as Baba Yaga. Polish folklore often portrays her as living in a house on one chicken leg rather than two, and this house spins continuously.
Polish Baba Yaga sometimes rides on a mop instead of in a mortar and pestle.
She also appears in connection with a specific folk costume from the Świętokrzyski Mountains, a black and red striped cloth that has become associated with her in Polish tradition. This cloth connects to a legendary witches' Sabbath said to occur on the Lisa Gora mountain, one of the most mystical sites in Polish folklore. In Polish tales, Baba Yaga is often portrayed somewhat more neutrally than in Russian stories. She appears as a wise woman with knowledge of herbal medicine and natural magic. She's still potentially dangerous, still someone to approach with caution and proper respect, but she's less likely to be the outright villain of the story. Instead, she's more often the holder of knowledge, someone the hero must consult to gain information or magical assistance. This reflects Poland's historical position at the crossroads of Eastern and Western European culture, where pagan and Christian traditions blended in particular ways. Interestingly, in some Polish stories, Baba Yaga lives not in a chicken-legged house, but in a gingerbread house, very similar to the witch's house in the German tale of Hansel and Gretel. This suggests cultural exchange and the blending of different folk traditions as they spread across Europe. The gingerbread house, like Baba Yaga's chicken-legged hut, is a dwelling that's not quite what it seems, a place where the boundary between the mundane and magical is thin. In Czech and Slavic folklore, she appears as Jezibaba, a name that combines elements suggesting a hedgehog or spiny creature with the word for old woman or grandmother. The Czech and Slavic Jezibaba maintains many of the same characteristics as the Russian Baba Yaga, but again with some local variations in how she's portrayed and the specific stories told about her. In Ukrainian folklore, Baba Yaga is sometimes portrayed with a greater emphasis on her role as a helper rather than a hindrance. Ukrainian tales often focus on her as someone who aids the protagonist in their journey, providing them with the tools or knowledge they need to overcome greater obstacles. This doesn't mean she's gentle or easy to deal with. She still sets difficult tasks, still speaks harshly, still threatens those who displease her. But her ultimate role in the story is more frequently beneficial. This Ukrainian interpretation might reflect the country's complex history and the resilience required to survive repeated invasions, occupations, and hardships. In this context, Baba Yaga becomes a symbol of the kind of harsh but necessary wisdom that helps people survive difficult times. She doesn't coddle or comfort, but she prepares you for the real challenges you'll face. In Slovenia, the name is reversed, and she becomes Yaga Baba, with the word order switched. She appears in Slovenian folklore with many of the same attributes, but again with variations in specific tales and local customs associated with her. Moving south into the Balkans, particularly in Serbian, Croatian, and Bosnian folklore, we find a similar figure called Baba Yaga. The name suggests a horned woman, and while Baba Yaga shares many characteristics with Baba Yaga, the emphasis on horns adds another dimension to her character. Horns in Slavic and European folklore, often associated with the devil and demonic forces after Christianization, but in older pagan traditions, horns were symbols of divine power, associated with various gods and goddesses, particularly those connected to nature and wild animals. Bulgarian and Macedonian folklore also features Baba Yaga, maintaining much of her character as it appears in Russian stories, though again with local variations in specific tales and how she's perceived within the culture. In Serbian folklore specifically, Baba Yaga appears sometimes as a spirit of the night, a being associated with the darkness and with dreams. This nocturnal aspect emphasizes her connection to the unconscious, to the hidden parts of the psyche that come forward when the rational, daylight mind sleeps. What's particularly interesting is that in some South Slavic traditions,
particularly in Montenegro, Baba Yaga appears as a carnival figure. During carnival celebrations, someone might dress as Baba Yaga, becoming a frightening but also entertaining character in the festivities. This carnival role is significant because carnival, in European tradition, has always been a time when normal social order is temporarily inverted, when people can take on different roles, when the boundary between acceptable and forbidden behavior becomes permeable. Baba Yaga fits perfectly into this liminal, boundary-crossing celebration. Even further afield, we find echoes of Baba Yaga in the folklore of other regions that came into contact with Slavic peoples. In some parts of Austria, particularly in Carinthia, which has a significant Slavic heritage, Baba Yaga appears in ritual contexts, showing how deeply these stories could penetrate into local practice and belief. The fascinating thing about these regional variations is what they tell us about how folklore works, how stories adapt to local needs and circumstances while maintaining core elements. Across all these different regions and cultures, certain things remain constant. Baba Yaga is old, she is powerful, she lives in the forest in an unusual dwelling, she must be approached with care and respect, she tests those who seek her aid, and she has the power to either help or harm. But the specific manifestation of these core elements changes to reflect local geography, local history, local needs. In regions with harsher, more threatening forests, Baba Yaga might be more frightening. In regions where women had more social power or where older folk traditions remained stronger, she might retain more of her goddess-like aspects.
In areas more thoroughly Christianized, she might be portrayed more negatively as an agent of evil rather than a complex, morally ambiguous figure. This regional variety also means that there's no single definitive Baba Yaga story. What we have instead is a character who lives in the collective imagination of many millions of people across many centuries and many lands, who appears in thousands of different stories, who has been shaped and reshaped by countless storytellers, each one adding their own emphases and interpretations, while preserving the essential mystery at her heart. It's also worth noting that Baba Yaga's influence extended beyond the Slavic world through cultural exchange. When Russian and Eastern European immigrants came to America, Australia, and other parts of the world, they brought Baba Yaga with them. She appears in the folklore of Russian American and Eastern European diaspora communities, sometimes unchanged, sometimes adapted to new circumstances. In some communities, Baba Yaga became a way to maintain connection to the old country, to the homeland left behind. Parents and grandparents would tell children Baba Yaga stories, passing down not just entertainment, but cultural identity, a link to a heritage that might otherwise be lost in the pressure to assimilate to a new culture. In other cases, Baba Yaga stories were adapted to new settings. Instead of a Russian birch forest, she might live in the American wilderness. Instead of a chicken-legged hut, her house might have different features that reflect the new environment. These adaptations show how resilient and flexible folklore is, how stories survive by changing while still maintaining their essential character. Part 4. The Complete Tale of Vasilisa the Beautiful. Now that we understand Baba Yaga's origins, her symbols, and her many forms across different regions, let's immerse ourselves fully in one of the most complete and famous stories featuring her. This is the tale of Vasilisa the Beautiful, as collected by Alexander Afanasyev in the 19th century. We're going to take our time with this story, exploring every detail, every symbol, every moment of transformation. Settle yourself more comfortably now. Let the day's tensions drain away from your shoulders, from your neck, from your face. Breathe deeply, and let's step into this story together. Once upon a time, in a merchant's house in Russia, there lived a little girl named Vasilisa. She was her parents' only child, and they loved her dearly.
Her mother was kind and gentle, and Vasilisa inherited her mother's beauty and sweet nature. But when Vasilisa was only 8 years old, her mother became gravely ill. As the mother lay dying, she called Vasilisa to her bedside. From underneath her pillow, she drew out a small wooden doll, no larger than a child's hand. The doll was exquisitely carved, with tiny features and little jointed limbs that could move. The mother placed this doll into Vasilisa's hands and spoke in a voice already growing faint. "Listen to me carefully, my dear daughter," she said. "I am dying, and with my maternal blessing, I leave you this doll. Keep it with you always, but show it to no one. When you are in trouble or distress, give the doll food and drink and ask its advice. It will help you in all your troubles." With these words, the mother kissed Vasilisa one last time, and then she died. Vasilisa grieved deeply for her mother, but she kept the doll with her always, hidden in the deepest pocket of her dress. And whenever she remembered, she would give it little bits of her food and drops of her drink. And the doll would indeed seem to come alive, its eyes brightening, its tiny mouth moving. It would offer her comfort in its small wooden way. After a proper period of mourning, Vasilisa's father, the merchant, remarried. He chose a widow with 2 daughters of her own, thinking that Vasilisa needed a mother's care and that his household needed a woman's hand. But the merchant had chosen poorly. The stepmother was cold and cruel, and she was jealous of Vasilisa's beauty and gentle nature, which made her own daughters appear plain and ill-tempered by comparison. The stepmother made Vasilisa's life miserable. She gave the girl all the hardest work to do, hoping to wear out her beauty with toil, to turn her skin rough and her hands red and cracked. She thought that hard labor and poor treatment would make Vasilisa ugly and miserable. But the opposite happened. The more work Vasilisa did, the more beautiful she became. Her face glowed with health, while her stepsisters, who did nothing but sit around all day, grew sallow and irritable from idleness. What the stepmother didn't know was that the doll was helping Vasilisa. Every night, Vasilisa would give the doll some of her supper and a little water, and while the girl slept, the doll would complete all her tasks. The garden would be weeded, the water carried, the fires laid, the floors scrubbed. Vasilisa would wake to find her work done, and she would have time to pick flowers in the meadow and rest in the sunshine. This is why, despite all the stepmother's efforts, Vasilisa remained beautiful and healthy, while the stepsisters withered from their own spite and laziness. Years passed this way. Vasilisa grew into a young woman of remarkable beauty. Suitors began to come to the house, asking for her hand in marriage. But the stepmother would send them all away, saying, "The elder daughters must marry first. I will not give the youngest before her sisters." And after sending the suitors away, she would beat Vasilisa out of spite. Now, the merchant often had to travel for his business, journeying to distant lands to trade his goods. During one of these trips, the stepmother moved the family to a different house. This new house was located very near a deep, dark forest. And in that forest, in a clearing no one could find unless they already knew the way, there stood the hut of Baba Yaga, the dreadful witch who ate people as easily as you or I might eat a chicken. The stepmother, in her wickedness, sent Vasilisa into the forest on various errands, hoping the girl would encounter Baba Yaga and never return. But the doll in Vasilisa's pocket always showed her the way home, guiding her steps so that she never strayed too near the witch's dwelling. As long as the doll protected her, Vasilisa could not come to harm. But the stepmother was patient in her cruelty. One autumn evening, as the days grew short and darkness came early, the stepmother gave tasks to all 3 girls. To the eldest daughter, she gave lace to weave. To the second daughter, she gave stockings to knit. And to Vasilisa, she gave spinning to do. Then the stepmother put out all the lights in the house except for one single candle where the girls were working, and she went to bed. The girls worked by the light of this one candle. After a while, one of the stepsisters took up the scissors to trim her lace, but as if by accident, though of course it was no accident at all, she put out the candle instead. "What shall we do now?" the stepsisters cried in false distress. "There's no light in the house, and our work isn't finished. Someone must go to Baba Yaga and ask her for fire." "I can see by the light of my pins," said the eldest, who was weaving lace. "I won't go." "I can see by the light of my needles," said the second, who was knitting. "I won't go." "Then Vasilisa must go," they said together. "Go to Baba Yaga and bring us fire." And they pushed her toward the door. Vasilisa went to her room, placed the supper she'd saved before the doll, and said, "Little doll, they are sending me to Baba Yaga for fire. Baba Yaga will eat me." The doll's eyes gleamed in the darkness. It ate the food Vasilisa offered and seemed to grow stronger. Then it spoke in its small wooden voice. "Do not fear, Vasilisa. Go where you are sent. While I am with you, no harm will come to you from Baba Yaga. But keep me with you always." So Vasilisa put the doll in her deepest pocket, made the sign of the cross, and walked into the dark forest. The forest at night was a place of deep shadows and strange sounds. Trees creaked, small animals rustled through the undergrowth. The wind whispered through the branches like voices speaking in an unknown language. Vasilisa walked, trembling but determined, going deeper and deeper into the woods. Suddenly, a rider swept past her. He was dressed entirely in white, his horse was white, his saddle and bridle were white. As he passed, the first light of dawn began to break through the trees. Vasilisa watched him disappear into the forest depths, and she walked on. She walked for hours as the morning progressed. The forest seemed endless, the trees growing thicker and darker the further she went.
Then, at midday, another rider appeared. This one was dressed all in red. His horse was red. Everything about him was the color of blood and flame. As he galloped past, the sun climbed to its zenith, blazing down through the occasional gaps in the forest canopy. Again, Vasilisa continued walking. All day she walked, and evening was approaching when she came at last to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a fence made of human bones. The fence posts were leg bones, and the crossbars were arm bones. Instead of locks on the gates, there were human teeth, sharp and grinning. And on top of each fence post sat a human skull with empty eye sockets that seemed to stare at her as she approached. Vasilisa was so terrified she stood frozen, unable to move forward or flee. But as she stood there, a third rider appeared. This one was dressed entirely in black, riding a black horse with black trappings. He rode straight up to the gate of the fence and vanished as if he had melted into the ground. And at that very moment, night fell completely, darkness swallowing the clearing. But the darkness didn't last. One by one, the eyes of all the skulls on the fence began to glow. They lit up like lamps, like fire, until the entire clearing was illuminated by their ghastly light. Vasilisa wanted to run, but she was too frightened to move. Her legs wouldn't obey her. Then came a terrible noise from the forest. Trees groaned and cracked, branches snapped. Something enormous was approaching. Through the trees burst Baba Yaga, riding in her mortar, driving it with the pestle, sweeping away her tracks with the broom. She rode right up to the gate and stopped. She lifted her long nose and sniffed the air. "Phoo, phoo," she cried. "I smell a Russian smell. Who's there?" Vasilisa approached, trembling with fear, and bowed low before the witch. "It is I, grandmother," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. My stepsister sent me to you to ask for fire, as ours has gone out." "Oh ho," said Baba Yaga, "so you come from the widow with 2 daughters. I know them. Well, if you want fire from me, you must work for it. You will live with me and serve me, and if I'm pleased with your service, I'll give you fire. If not, I'll eat you." Then Baba Yaga shouted to the gate, "Open up, my strong locks! Open up my tall gates!" The gate swung open and Baba Yaga rode through into the yard. Vasilisa followed, and immediately the gates closed behind her with a clang. Inside the yard, Baba Yaga's house stood on its giant chicken legs. The windows glowed like eyes. The fence of skulls cast dancing shadows everywhere. Baba Yaga got down from her mortar and stretched, her bones creaking. "Well, come inside then," she commanded. Inside the hut, Baba Yaga laid down on the enormous stove that stretched from wall to wall. "I'm hungry," she announced. "Bring me everything in the oven." Vasilisa hurried to obey. In the oven she found enough food for 10 people. Roasted meat, pies, bread, pastries, mead, beer, and kvass. She brought it all to Baba Yaga, who ate and drank everything, leaving only a small crust of bread and a tiny bit of cabbage soup for Vasilisa. When she'd finished eating, Baba Yaga settled more comfortably on the stove and gave Vasilisa her instructions. "Tomorrow when I leave, you must clean the yard, sweep the hut, cook the dinner, wash the linen, and then you must go to the grain shed. You'll see a heap of wheat there. You must sort through it and remove every single black grain from the wheat. Every black grain, do you understand? If you don't finish everything, I'll eat you when I return." Having given these instructions, Baba Yaga began to snore. Her snores shook the hut like thunder. Vasilisa ate her tiny portion of food, then took out the doll. She fed it the last crumbs of bread and whispered, little doll, help me. Baba Yaga has given me impossible tasks and threatens to eat me if they're not done." The doll's eyes shone bright. "Don't be afraid, Vasilisa. Eat your supper, say your prayers, and go to sleep. Morning is wiser than evening." So Vasilisa lay down on a bench in the corner and slept. When she woke, it was just barely dawn. She looked out the window and saw the skulls on the fence growing dim as their light faded. Then the white rider flashed past, and dawn broke fully. Baba Yaga went into the yard, whistled, and her mortar and pestle appeared before her. The red rider galloped by, and the sun rose. Baba Yaga got into the mortar and flew away, driving with the pestle and sweeping away her tracks with the broom. Vasilisa found herself alone. She explored the hut, amazed at the abundance she found everywhere. The pantries were full, the storage chests overflowing. She wondered how she would ever complete all the tasks, and then she looked around and saw that everything was already done. The yard was clean, the hut was swept, the linen was washed and hung to dry, and the dinner was cooking on the stove. Only the wheat remained, and as she watched, the doll was finishing the last of it, picking out the final black grains. "You've saved me again, little doll!" Vasilisa cried, grateful beyond words. "All you need to do is cook the dinner," squeaked the doll. "Then rest, and may God be with you." By evening, Vasilisa had set the table and was waiting for Baba Yaga's return. Dusk fell, the black rider swept past the fence and vanished, and all the skull's eyes began to glow. The trees shook, the leaves rustled, and Baba Yaga arrived. "Is everything done?" she demanded as she entered. "See for yourself, grandmother," Vasilisa replied quietly. Baba Yaga inspected everything, poking into every corner, checking the yard, examining the wheat. She could find no fault anywhere. Disappointed, she grunted and said, "Well, that's good." Then she called out, "My faithful servants, my dear friends, come grind my wheat." 3 pairs of hands appeared from nowhere, took the wheat, and vanished with it. Baba Yaga ate her enormous dinner, then settled on the stove to sleep.
But before sleeping, she gave Vasilisa her instructions for the next day. Tomorrow, do everything you did today, and in addition, take the poppy seeds from the shed. Someone has mixed dirt with them deliberately. You must remove every speck of dirt from every poppy seed. If you don't, I'll eat you. Again, Vasilisa fed her doll and asked for help. And again, the doll told her to sleep, that morning is wiser than evening. And again, while Vasilisa slept, the doll completed all the impossible tasks. This pattern repeated for a 3rd day. But on the 3rd evening, as Baba Yaga inspected everything and could again find no fault, Vasilisa found her courage and spoke. "Grandmother," she said, "may I ask you some questions?" Baba Yaga's eyes narrowed. "You may ask, but remember, not every question is good to ask. If you know too much, you'll grow old too soon." "I only want to ask about the things I saw on my way here," Vasilisa said carefully. "As I was walking, a rider dressed all in white on a white horse passed me. Who was he?" "That is my bright dawn," Baba Yaga answered. "Then another rider overtook me, dressed in red on a red horse. Who was that?" "That is my red sun," said Baba Yaga. "And just as I reached your fence, a rider in black on a black horse rode past and disappeared at your gate. Who was he?" "That is my dark midnight," Baba Yaga replied. "They are all my faithful servants." She paused, studying Vasilisa with eyes as sharp as her iron teeth. "Have you no other questions?" Vasilisa thought of the invisible hands, the mysterious servants who ground the wheat and performed tasks she couldn't see. She wanted to ask about them, but something made her hesitate. "No, grandmother. You said yourself that if one knows too much, one grows old too soon." "Wise girl!" Baba Yaga exclaimed. "You are right not to ask. I do not like people who pry into my household affairs, and I eat the too curious. But now it's my turn. How is it that you've been able to complete all the tasks I set you?" Vasilisa's heart leaped into her throat. What could she say? If she revealed the doll, would Baba Yaga take it from her? But she couldn't lie to the witch either. "My mother's blessing helps me," she said simply, which was true in its way. "What?" shrieked Baba Yaga. "A blessing? Get out of my house at once. I want no blessed ones here. Get out." She seized Vasilisa and pushed her toward the door. But before Vasilisa left, Baba Yaga took one of the skulls from the fence, fixed it on a stick, and thrust it into her hands. "Here's your fire. Here's what your stepsisters sent you for. Take it and go, and may it serve you well." Vasilisa ran from the yard, the gate slammed shut behind her. She ran through the dark forest, but the skull on the stick lit her way with its glowing eyes, lighting up the path before her feet. All through the night she ran, and the skull's light never wavered. By morning she emerged from the forest and saw her stepmother's house ahead. When she reached the house, she was about to throw away the skull, thinking she no longer needed it. But the skull spoke to her in a hollow voice. "Don't throw me away. Take me to your stepmother." For the first time since leaving her father's house, Vasilisa approached the door without fear. The stepsisters and stepmother saw her coming with the skull and rushed out to meet her. They had been without fire all this time and couldn't light any themselves. Every time they tried to borrow fire from neighbors, it would go out as soon as they brought it inside. "Perhaps your fire will last," the stepmother said, taking the skull from Vasilisa. They brought the skull inside and set it on the table. But from that moment on, the skull's eyes never left the stepmother and the 2 stepsisters. Wherever they went in the house, the fiery eyes followed them. They couldn't sleep. They couldn't escape the burning gaze. By morning, they had been burned to ashes,
all three of them. Only Vasilisa, with her mother's blessing, remained unharmed. Vasilisa buried the skull in the garden, locked up the house, and went to the town. There, a kind old woman took her in. Vasilisa waited for her father's return, supporting herself by spinning. But her spinning was so fine, so extraordinarily beautiful, that it was like nothing anyone had ever seen. She spun thread so delicate it was like silk, like spider's web, like morning mist. Eventually, this thread came to the attention of the Tsar himself. The old woman brought him a shirt made from Vasilisa's thread, and the Tsar was so impressed that he demanded to meet the spinner who could create such work. When he saw Vasilisa, he fell in love with her beauty and her gentle nature. He made her his Tsarina, his queen. When Vasilisa's father returned from his journey, he came to live in the palace with his daughter. Vasilisa kept the old woman who had sheltered her as a companion in the court. And the little doll she kept with her always, in her pocket, close to her heart, for the rest of her life. Part 5. Understanding Vasilisa's journey. Now that we've experienced Vasilisa's complete tale, let's explore what it means, the layers of symbolism woven through every element of the story. Because this isn't just a fairy tale about a girl and a witch, it's a story about transformation, about the journey from childhood to adulthood, about finding your own power and wisdom in the face of impossible challenges. Vasilisa begins her story as a beloved child, protected by her mother's love. But death comes, as it must, and her mother leaves her with the most important gift possible, a doll and a blessing. This doll is not simply a toy. In the context of the story, it represents several things simultaneously. On one level, the doll is Vasilisa's mother's love made manifest. It's the wisdom and care the mother would have continued to provide had she lived, preserved in physical form so Vasilisa can carry it with her always.
When Vasilisa feeds the doll, she's nurturing the connection to her mother, keeping that love alive and active in her life. On another level, the doll represents Vasilisa's own intuition, her inner wisdom, the part of herself that knows what to do even when her conscious mind is overwhelmed with fear. Notice that the doll only comes alive and helps when Vasilisa remembers to feed it, to tend to it. This teaches an important lesson. You must nourish your intuition, pay attention to your inner wisdom, give it time and care, or it cannot help you. The doll also represents the spiritual inheritance passed from mother to daughter, the women's mysteries and women's knowledge that has been transmitted across generations. In many traditional cultures, mothers taught daughters the skills they would need not just for practical life, but for spiritual and emotional survival. The doll embodies all of this teaching, all of this female lineage of wisdom. When the stepmother enters the story, we see a classic fairy tale dynamic, but again, there's deeper meaning here. The stepmother represents the part of the world, of society, that is threatened by young feminine beauty and power. She represents the older generation that, instead of nurturing the young, tries to destroy them out of jealousy and fear. She is what Baba Yaga could be if Baba Yaga's power were turned entirely to destruction without the balancing wisdom. The stepsisters are extensions of the stepmother's jealousy and cruelty. They are what Vasilisa might become if she allows bitterness and laziness to corrupt her. They represent the path not taken, the life Vasilisa avoids through her connection to her doll, to her mother's blessing, to her own inner goodness. When the stepmother moves the family close to the forest, close to Baba Yaga's realm, she's deliberately creating a situation where Vasilisa will be in danger. But this is also, unknowingly, creating the conditions for Vasilisa's transformation. Sometimes the very thing that's meant to harm us becomes the catalyst for our growth. The night the candle is deliberately extinguished is the moment of crisis. Light represents consciousness, civilization, safety. Darkness represents the unknown, the unconscious, danger. By extinguishing the light, the stepsisters are forcing Vasilisa into darkness, into the unknown.
they're sending her into the wilderness, the dangerous liminal space where transformation happens. The fact that Vasilisa must go to ask for fire is significant. Fire represents life force, warmth, the ability to survive, consciousness, and enlightenment. Vasilisa must journey to the realm of death, to Baba Yaga, who exists at the boundary between life and death, in order to bring back the fire of new consciousness, new life, transformation. This journey into the forest mirrors countless initiation rites and heroes' journeys throughout world mythology.
The hero must leave the known world, must venture into dangerous territory, must face tests and trials, and must return transformed, bringing back gifts for the community. Vasilisa's journey follows this pattern perfectly. The 3 riders she encounters are among the most powerful symbols in the entire story. They are Baba Yaga's servants, and they represent time itself. Day, sun, night, dawn, noon, midnight. The progression of hours, the cycle that never stops, that no mortal can escape or control. The fact that these riders serve Baba Yaga emphasizes her power over time, her existence outside normal temporal constraints. But the riders also mark Vasilisa's journey. She leaves at dawn, journeys through the day, and arrives at Baba Yaga's dwelling at night. This day-long journey represents the full cycle, the complete passage through time, the movement from one state of being to another. By the time Vasilisa reaches Baba Yaga, a full cycle has passed. The old self has had time to fall away. The new self is ready to be born. The fence of bones is the ultimate threshold marker. This is the boundary beyond which nothing can be taken for granted, where death is present and real. The skulls with their glowing eyes represent all those who have come before, all those who have attempted this journey. Some failed and died, but their skulls remain as witnesses and as warnings, and perhaps also as guides, lighting the way for those brave enough to proceed. When Vasilisa approaches Baba Yaga, her respectful address, calling her grandmother, is crucial. Despite her terror, Vasilisa shows respect. She acknowledges Baba Yaga's power and status. She doesn't try to trick or fight or flee. This respectful approach is what allows the encounter to become transformative rather than merely destructive. Baba Yaga's tests are impossible tasks. Clean the yard, sweep the hut, wash the linen, cook the dinner, sort the wheat, clean the poppy seeds. These are all traditional women's work, domestic tasks, but rendered impossible by their scale and time constraints. What Baba Yaga is really testing is not Vasilisa's ability to perform these tasks physically. She's testing Vasilisa's wisdom in knowing when to ask for help, her connection to her intuition, the doll, her humility in accepting aid. The fact that the doll completes the tasks is important. It's not that Vasilisa cheats or fails to do the work. It's that she has learned to work with her intuition, with her inner wisdom, with the spiritual gifts her mother gave her. The tasks get done because Vasilisa is connected to something deeper than her own small ego, her own limited physical abilities. Each night, Baba Yaga eats an enormous amount of food, enough for many people, leaving only scraps for Vasilisa. This represents the voracious appetite of the transformative process, the way that real change consumes almost everything we are, leaving very little of the old self intact. But those scraps, those tiny bits that remain, like the doll itself, are enough. They are the essential core that survives transformation. When Vasilisa finally dares to ask Baba Yaga questions, we see her growing courage and wisdom. She asks about the riders, but stops short of asking about the invisible servants. This shows she's learning discernment, learning that some mysteries should remain mysteries, that some knowledge is too dangerous or too sacred to be casually sought. Baba Yaga rewards this wisdom by calling her wise girl. But then comes the crucial moment. Baba Yaga asks how Vasilisa accomplished the impossible tasks. Vasilisa could lie, could dissemble, could refuse to answer. But she speaks a truth.
My mother's blessing helps me. This is perhaps the most important moment in the entire story. Baba Yaga's violent reaction, throwing Vasilisa out because she carries a blessing, seems strange until you understand what it represents. Baba Yaga exists in the realm of death, of Nav, the underworld. A blessing is a protection from that realm, a mark that says, this one belongs to life. Baba Yaga cannot keep or harm someone who carries a blessing because that person is claimed by life, not death. By invoking her mother's blessing, Vasilisa has proven that she has passed the test. She has gone into the realm of death and returned to life. She has faced the great witch of the forest and survived. She has completed impossible tasks. She has shown respect, wisdom, courage, and connection to her spiritual inheritance. She is transformed. The skull Baba Yaga gives her is the fire Vasilisa was sent to retrieve, but it's also something more. It's the consciousness she has gained, the power she has earned. The skull is a symbol of death, yes, but also of transformation completed. It contains fire, light, life force. It's death in service of life. When Vasilisa returns home, the skull destroys the stepmother and stepsisters. They are burned to ashes by the very fire they sent Vasilisa to fetch. This is justice, certainly, but it's also symbolic. The forces that tried to destroy Vasilisa, that forced her into this transformative journey, are themselves destroyed by what she has become. The old order that oppressed her cannot survive in the presence of her new power. Notice that Vasilisa buries the skull when the stepmother and stepsisters are gone. She doesn't keep wielding this destructive power. She has learned what she needed to learn, has received the gifts the journey offered, and now she moves forward into a new phase of life. The skull has served its purpose. Her time with the old woman, her extraordinary spinning, her eventual marriage to the Tsar, all of this represents Vasilisa stepping into her full power and potential. She has been tested by fire, literally, and has emerged not just unharmed, but elevated. She becomes a queen. She brings her father to live in prosperity. She cares for the old woman who helped her. She keeps the doll always, maintaining her connection to her mother, to her intuition, to the wisdom that saved her.
This is the pattern of the heroine's journey. Leave home, face impossible challenges, meet the dark goddess, undergo transformation, return with new powers and gifts. Use those gifts to create a better life, not just for yourself, but for those around you. Part 6. Baba Yaga in Folk Belief and Everyday Life. While fairy tales like Vasilisa's give us Baba Yaga in story form, she also lived in the folk beliefs and everyday practices of Slavic peoples in ways that might surprise us. She wasn't just a character in bedtime stories. She was a presence invoked in daily life, in superstitions, in warnings, in rituals. In traditional Russian and Slavic villages, Baba Yaga's name was used to frighten children into good behavior. If you don't obey, Baba Yaga will come and take you away, mothers would warn. If you wander too far into the forest, Baba Yaga will catch you and eat you. This practical use of Baba Yaga as a boogeyman served an important purpose. It kept children from wandering into genuinely dangerous places, from getting lost in vast forests where they truly could come to harm. But the invocation of Baba Yaga was more than just a scare tactic. It was also a way of teaching children about boundaries, about the existence of forces in the world that are powerful and not necessarily benevolent. In a harsh environment, where winters were brutal, where forests were vast and could be genuinely threatening, where survival required constant vigilance and respect for the powers of nature, Baba Yaga was a personification of that reality. Some folklorists have noted that in certain regions, elderly women, particularly those who lived alone, who knew herbalism and healing, who served as midwives, or who were known to tell fortunes, might be called Baba Yaga, either affectionately or as an insult, depending on the relationship. These were women who held power outside the normal family structure, who had knowledge that others didn't, who existed somewhat apart from the community while also serving essential functions within it.
This connection between Baba Yaga and real women, particularly older women with special knowledge, suggests that she might have originally been a title or a role, rather than a specific individual. A Baba Yaga, rather than the Baba Yaga. The witch, priestess, wise woman, midwife, herbalist who served a village might be its Baba Yaga, the one who presided over births and deaths, who helped with difficult transitions, who knew the old ways. In some rural areas, traditions persisted well into the 19th century and even early 20th centuries that involved leaving offerings at the forest edge, at places associated with spirits or with the old gods. While these practices were officially Christian by that time, beneath the Christian veneer, older beliefs persisted. A woman might leave bread or milk at the edge of the forest, ostensibly for forest spirits, but perhaps also with the thought of Baba Yaga, asking for protection or help, or simply showing respect.
Baba Yaga also appeared in folk beliefs about weather and seasons. In some regions, particularly harsh weather, strange storms, unseasonable cold or heat might be attributed to Baba Yaga's influence. She was riding through the sky in her mortar, stirring up the wind with her broom. This association with weather connects back to her nature as a force of nature itself, unpredictable and powerful. The birch tree, so central to Russian landscape and culture, appears repeatedly in Baba Yaga's stories. Her broom is made of birch switches. The forests she inhabits are birch forests. In Russian folk practice, birch had protective and cleansing properties. Birch branches were used in the banya, the Russian bathhouse, to beat the skin gently, promoting circulation and health. Birch bark was used for writing, for making containers, for roofing. The tree was central to life. But birch was also associated with spirits, with the souls of the dead, with the connection between earth and sky. In folk belief, the birch was a tree that stood between worlds, just as Baba Yaga does. In spring, young women would go into the birch groves to perform rituals, to sing songs, to celebrate the return of warmth. These practices were officially Christian celebrations of Trinity Sunday, but they carried echoes of much older pagan spring festivals. The mortar and pestle that Baba Yaga flies in had their own significance in daily life. These were common household tools used for grinding grain, crushing spices, preparing medicine. But the act of grinding, of transformation from whole to broken, from grain to flour, from raw to processed, carried symbolic weight. The mortar and pestle were tools of transformation, and in magical practice across many cultures, they were used for preparing potions, medicines, magical compounds. That Baba Yaga would use these domestic tools for flight reverses their meaning. Instead of being bound to earth, to the domestic sphere, to the kitchen, she takes these symbols of women's traditional work and uses them to transcend boundaries, to fly, to move between worlds. It's a subversion of the expected, a claim of power through the very objects that might be seen as limiting. In some folk practices, when a woman was giving birth, particularly if it was a difficult birth, the midwife might invoke various protections and blessings. While these were officially Christian prayers to Mary and the saints, anthropologists have noted that some of the oldest women, the most traditional midwives, would also whisper older names, older invocations. Birth is a threshold moment, a passage between life and death, exactly the kind of transition over which Baba Yaga presides. The midwife, presiding over this threshold, was in some sense performing Baba Yaga's function, whether or not she invoked the name explicitly. Death rituals, too, sometimes showed traces of Baba Yaga's influence.
The preparation of the body, the specific ways of laying out the dead, the objects placed in the coffin, the words spoken over the dying and the dead, all of these practices in traditional Slavic culture were performed primarily by older women who knew the proper ways. These women were guardians of the threshold between life and death, just as Baba Yaga is. In Russian and Slavic folk magic, which persisted alongside and often intertwined with Christian practice, There were spells and charms for various purposes. Some of these invoked Baba Yaga directly or indirectly. A charm for protection might create an invisible fence, like Baba Yaga's bone fence. A spell for binding or banishing might invoke imagery of the mortar and pestle. While church authorities would have condemned such practices as witchcraft, for ordinary people, these represented continuity with old ways of understanding and interacting with the world. The forest itself, Baba Yaga's realm, held a complex place in folk belief. The forest provided resources: wood for building and burning, game for hunting, mushrooms and berries for food, herbs for medicine. People depended on the forest for survival. But the forest was also dangerous and easy to get lost in, home to wolves and bears, a place where the unwary could freeze in winter or become hopelessly disoriented in its endless expanses. This dual nature of the forest, as both provider and threat, made it a perfect home for Baba Yaga. She embodied the forest's character. She could be helpful, providing what you need, but she could also be deadly dangerous. The forest demanded respect, and so did she. Those who approached the forest properly, who knew its ways, who showed it respect, could benefit from it. Those who were careless or disrespectful could pay with their lives. The same was true of Baba Yaga. In folk songs and sayings, Baba Yaga appeared often enough that her name became proverbial. "You're as scary as Baba Yaga," someone might say, or "She flies around like Baba Yaga in her mortar," describing someone who rushes about frantically. These casual invocations kept Baba Yaga present in everyday language, kept her alive in the collective imagination. Interestingly, in some regions, the word Baba, or variations of it, became used for natural phenomena that looked vaguely human-shaped. A strange rock formation might be called a Baba, an oddly shaped tree stump might be a Baba. This suggests a deeper association between the word and the concept of earth forces, natural powers taking quasi-human form. Baba Yaga, then, is the ultimate Baba, the Earth Mother or Earth Force in its most powerful and undiluted form. Part 7. Other stories featuring Baba Yaga. While the tale of Vasilisa is perhaps the most complete and famous Baba Yaga story, she appears in many other folk tales, each showing different facets of her character.
Let's explore some of these other stories, taking our time with each one, letting the details wash over us, like water, like the gentle approach of sleep. The Tale of the Three Kingdoms. In one story, a young prince named Ivan sets out on a quest to find the kidnapped wife of his brother, who has been taken by the evil sorcerer, Koschei the Deathless. Ivan's journey takes him far from home, through dark forests and across burning rivers, until he reaches a small hut in a clearing. The hut stands on chicken legs, and Ivan knows immediately whose dwelling this is. Little house," he says, "turn your back to the forest and your front to me." The house obeys, creaking and groaning as it rotates. Inside, Ivan finds not one, but 3 Baba Yagas, 3 sisters, all sharing the same name. The first Baba Yaga is elderly, but not unkind. When Ivan explains his quest, respectfully addressing her as grandmother and telling her he seeks Koschei's realm, she feeds him and lets him rest. Then she gives him a magical ball of thread. "Follow this ball," she tells him. "It will lead you to my middle sister. She may be able to help you further." Ivan thanks her and continues his journey, following the ball as it rolls before him through the forest. After many days, he comes to another hut on chicken legs. Inside is the second Baba Yaga, the middle sister. She, too, treats him hospitably when he addresses her with proper respect.
She gives him advice about the dangers ahead and a magical comb, and sends him onward to the third and youngest sister. The youngest Baba Yaga is the most dangerous. When Ivan arrives at her hut, she is sharpening her iron teeth and immediately declares she will eat him. But Ivan remembers the advice of the other sisters. He speaks the proper words, shows the proper respect, and tells her of his quest. This youngest Baba Yaga tests him severely, giving him 3 impossible tasks. First, he must tend her herd of magical mares for 3 days without letting a single one escape. If he fails, she will eat him. The mares are actually Baba Yaga's daughters in disguise, and they can take any form, disappear into mist, hide in the earth. But Ivan has magical helpers, animals he spared on his journey who now come to his aid. Birds drive the mares back when they fly into the sky. Fish corral them when they dive into water. Mice find them when they become small and hide. For 3 days, Ivan completes the task. Each night, exhausted, he sleeps, and each morning he wakes to find the mares safely contained. Baba Yaga is furious that he has succeeded, but she keeps her word. She gives him one of her magical horses, a horse so swift it can outrun the wind, can leap over mountains, can cross oceans in a single bound. But do not let me catch you, or I will grind your bones in my mortar. Ivan flees on the magical horse, and Baba Yaga pursues him in her mortar, driving with the pestle, gaining ground, despite the horse's incredible speed.
When she is almost upon him, Ivan throws behind him the magical comb the middle sister gave him. Instantly, it transforms into a forest so dense that not even wind can pass through. This delays Baba Yaga, while she gnaws and crashes her way through. When she nearly catches him again, Ivan uses another gift, and it becomes a mountain of glass, slippery and impossible to climb. But Baba Yaga begins to gnaw through it with her iron teeth, and again she nearly overtakes him. Finally, when she is almost upon him, Ivan reaches a river. He leaps across on his magical horse, but Baba Yaga cannot cross running water. She stands on the far shore, shaking her fist at him, and then she returns to her forest realm. Ivan continues his quest, eventually finding and defeating Koshe the Deathless, rescuing his brother's wife, and returning home in triumph. Without Baba Yaga's help, however reluctantly given, he never could have succeeded. This story shows Baba Yaga in her role as unwilling helper. She doesn't want to aid Ivan, but the rules of hospitality and fair dealing compel her. When approached with respect, when proper protocols are followed, even the most dangerous supernatural being must respond according to the ancient laws. The 3 sisters also recall the triple goddess aspect, the maiden, mother, and crone, though here all 3 are crones, perhaps representing different stages of age and danger. The Stolen Children. A darker tale tells of a poor peasant family with several children. The parents must work in the fields from dawn until dark, and they leave the children in the care of the eldest, a girl of about 12. But one day, something comes out of the forest. It might be Baba Yaga herself, or it might be one of her servants, a creature of twisted wood and malice. This being steals all the younger children, carrying them away into the forest toward Baba Yaga's hut, where presumably she will cook them and eat them. The eldest sister sees what has happened and runs after the creature, following it deep into the forest. She passes through increasingly dark and strange parts of the woods until she reaches the bone fence and the chicken-legged hut.
Inside the hut, she finds her siblings imprisoned, and Baba Yaga is heating her oven, preparing to roast them. The girl must think quickly. She asks Baba Yaga if she can help prepare her siblings for cooking, pretending to be eager to assist. Baba Yaga, pleased with what she thinks is cooperation, allows this. The girl then tricks Baba Yaga. She asks the witch to demonstrate how the children should be positioned on the oven paddle for cooking. When Baba Yaga lies down on the paddle to show her, the girl quickly shoves the paddle into the oven and traps the witch inside. She frees her siblings, and they all flee from the hut. But before they go, they show kindness to the things and creatures that Baba Yaga has neglected or abused. They feed the hungry cat, oil the squeaking gate, water the thirsty birch tree by the door, give water to the dry well. When Baba Yaga escapes the oven and pursues them, these things that the children helped now hinder Baba Yaga. The cat trips her. The gate refuses to open. The birch tree whips its branches in her face. The well won't give her water to drink. By the time Baba Yaga overcomes these obstacles, the children have escaped the forest and reached home safely. This story teaches several lessons. First, it shows that Baba Yaga, for all her power, can be outsmarted by quick thinking and courage. Second, it emphasizes the importance of kindness and proper treatment of all things. The children succeed not just through cleverness, but through compassion, helping the neglected creatures and objects even when they're in danger themselves. This kindness is rewarded. The story also shows that Baba Yaga, like many villains in fairy tales, has a weakness. She can be tricked. Her pride and hunger can override her caution, and things that are mistreated will eventually turn against you, even if you're a powerful witch. This is a subtle but important message. Power maintained through cruelty is unstable. Those you abuse may seem powerless, but they will help your enemies when the opportunity comes. Part 8. Baba Yaga as Trickster and Teacher. One of the most important aspects of Baba Yaga's character is her role as a trickster figure and a teacher. These two functions are deeply connected. The trickster in mythology doesn't teach through gentle instruction, but through challenges, through tests, through situations that force the student to dig deep and find resources they didn't know they had. Baba Yaga never makes things easy. Even when she's helping, even when she's on the hero's side, she creates obstacles. She sets impossible tasks. She speaks in riddles. She withholds information. She threatens. She tests. Why? Because easy gifts have no value. Knowledge that comes without effort isn't truly learned. Power that's simply handed to you doesn't transform you. Think about the tasks she sets for Vasilisa. Clean the yard, sort the wheat, remove the dirt from the poppy seeds. These tasks are impossible for any normal human to complete in the time allotted, but they're not impossible for someone who has learned to access deeper resources, to call on intuition, to work with spiritual gifts and magical helpers. Baba Yaga is not testing whether Vasilisa can physically accomplish these tasks. She's testing whether Vasilisa has the wisdom to know when to ask for help, the humility to accept that help, the connection to something greater than her small self. This is the trickster's teaching method. The trickster doesn't explain. The trickster creates situations where you must figure things out for yourself. And in that process of figuring things out, of struggling, of being pushed to your limits, you discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed. You transform. Baba Yaga also teaches through reversal and subversion. She takes what's expected and turns it upside down. A house should stay in one place, but hers walks. Domestic tools like mortars and pestles are for grinding grain, but she flies in them. An old woman should be weak and helpless, but she's terrifyingly powerful. Fire should warm and comfort, but the fire in the skull's eyes can kill. Nothing about Baba Yaga is quite what it seems, and this constant subversion of expectations forces people to think differently, to see beyond surface appearances. The trickster in world mythology often exists at the boundaries, at the margins, at the crossroads. The trickster can move between worlds, between categories, between different states of being. The trickster doesn't belong fully to any one realm, and this outsider status gives the trickster freedom and power. Baba Yaga embodies all of this. She exists at the boundary between life and death, between the human world and the wilderness, between the known and the unknown. She is neither fully good nor fully evil. She helps and she harms. She gives and she takes away. This liminal position is crucial to her teaching function. Real transformation happens at thresholds, at boundaries, in the between spaces. When you're comfortable, settled, safe in the middle of what you know, you don't change, you don't grow. Change requires going to the edge, stepping across the threshold into uncertain territory. Baba Yaga guards these thresholds. She tests those who would cross. And if you pass her tests, you emerge transformed, carrying gifts from the other side. But Baba Yaga's teaching is not gentle. She's not a nurturing kindergarten teacher praising every small effort. She's harsh. She's demanding. She threatens to eat you if you fail. This harshness is part of the lesson. Life is not gentle. The real challenges you'll face won't make allowances for your fears or your limitations. Baba Yaga prepares you for reality by being harsh herself. If you can face Baba Yaga and survive, you can face anything. There's also a deep wisdom in her testing. Baba Yaga doesn't test physical strength or conventional beauty or social status. The heroes and heroines who succeed with her aren't necessarily the strongest or the most beautiful. What Baba Yaga values is respect, courage, wisdom, resourcefulness, kindness to the neglected and overlooked, proper observation of rituals and protocols, connection to spiritual resources, and humility. These are qualities that have real value for survival and for living a good life. Baba Yaga, in her seemingly arbitrary and frightening tests, is actually identifying and rewarding the qualities that matter most. The lazy and cruel are punished. The kind and clever are rewarded. The respectful receive help. The arrogant are destroyed. Under the surface chaos and danger, there's a deep moral logic to Baba Yaga's world. As a teacher, Baba Yaga also preserves and transmits old knowledge. She knows how to speak with animals.
She understands the language of plants. She can read omens and signs in nature. She knows the properties of herbs and stones. She understands the movements of celestial bodies and the cycles of time. She knows the old stories, the old gods, the old ways that were already being forgotten when these tales were first being written down. When a hero or heroine visits Baba Yaga and succeeds, they return not just with a magical object or permission to continue their quest. They return with knowledge. They've learned something essential about themselves, about the world, about how to navigate challenges. They've received an education that no book could provide, one that comes from facing genuine danger and genuine mystery, and emerging transformed on the other side. Part 9, The Enduring Mystery. Now we've come nearly to the end of our long journey together through Baba Yaga's world. We've traced her origins back through time, explored her symbols and regional variations, experienced her stories and contemplated her meanings. But there's one final thing to acknowledge about Baba Yaga: her essential mystery. Despite all we've explored tonight, despite centuries of stories and scholarly analysis, Baba Yaga remains fundamentally mysterious. She cannot be fully explained or understood. She cannot be reduced to a simple meaning or a tidy interpretation. This is not a failure of understanding. This is her nature. Baba Yaga represents the aspects of existence that resist easy categorization. She is the reminder that not everything can be controlled, predicted, or understood. She is the acknowledgement that life contains wildness, darkness, ambiguity, transformation, death, and rebirth, realities that cannot be domesticated or made comfortable. In a world that increasingly values certainty, control, and clear answers, Baba Yaga's enduring presence in our collective imagination suggests a deep hunger for contact with mystery. We need stories that don't resolve neatly, characters who can't be simply labeled as good or evil, encounters that leave us changed but unable to fully articulate how or why. The chicken-legged hut that walks through the forest, appearing when and where it chooses, represents this essential unpredictability. You cannot summon Baba Yaga. You cannot control when or whether you'll encounter her. You can only prepare yourself as best you can, approach with respect if you do meet her, and trust that the encounter, however difficult, serves some purpose you may not fully understand until much later. The Fence of Bones reminds us that death is real, that danger exists, that not everyone who seeks transformation survives the process. This is not meant to terrorize us, but to remind us that stakes matter, that growth requires risk, that nothing worth having comes without the possibility of loss.
The three riders, white, red, and black, remind us that time passes regardless of our wishes, that we are all subject to forces far larger than ourselves, that the cycle of day and night, light and darkness continues whether we understand it or not. Baba Yaga commands these riders, which means she exists somehow outside normal time, even as she is intimately connected to it. This paradox is part of her mystery. When we encounter Baba Yaga in stories, whether ancient tales or modern adaptations, we're encountering something that touches on deep psychological and spiritual truths. The journey into the forest is the journey into our own unconscious, into the parts of ourselves we don't know or have tried to forget. The impossible tasks are the challenges life presents that seem beyond our capacity, but somehow must be faced anyway. The gifts and curses Baba Yaga dispenses are the consequences of our choices, of how we face difficulty, of whether we approach the unknown with respect or with arrogance. But these interpretations, useful as they are, never quite capture the full reality of Baba Yaga. She is always more than any single interpretation. She is always stranger, wilder, more complex than we expect. And this is exactly as it should be. The minute we think we fully understand Baba Yaga, the minute we believe we've explained her completely, she shifts, reveals another aspect, reminds us that mystery remains. In the modern world, with its emphasis on rationality and scientific explanation, we've lost much of our comfort with mystery. We want everything explained, every question answered, every experience processed and understood. But Baba Yaga suggests that some things should remain mysterious, that not everything needs to be explained, that there's value in encounter and experience that transcends intellectual understanding. When Vasilisa stands before the fence of glowing skulls, when she enters the chicken-legged hut, when she faces Baba Yaga herself, she's not trying to understand or analyze, she's present in the moment, responding with her full being, her courage, her courtesy, her connection to her inner wisdom through the doll. The experience transforms her not because she understands it, but because she lives through it fully. This is what Baba Yaga offers us, across centuries and cultures, the invitation to experience rather than merely understand, to be transformed rather than merely informed, to embrace mystery rather than insist on explanation. She offers us the forest path that leads away from the safe and known into the dangerous and transformative.
She offers us challenges that seem impossible, but somehow can be faced. She offers us the reminder that death and darkness are not the enemy, but part of the wholeness of existence.
And she offers us herself, not as a comfortable grandmother figure who will make everything easy, but as a fierce, wild, dangerous, wise, complex, mysterious force that might help us or might harm us, depending on how we approach her, on what we bring to the encounter, on what we're ready to learn and to become. The stories of Baba Yaga have survived for so long because they touch something essential in the human experience. They speak to the parts of us that know life is not simple, that transformation requires difficulty, that wisdom comes through ordeal, that the greatest gifts are often guarded by the greatest dangers, and that becoming who we truly are requires leaving behind who we thought we were and walking into unknown territory with nothing but courage and whatever small wisdom we've managed to gather along the way. Part 10. A gentle vignette. The grandmother's gift. Now, as we move deeper into this night together, let me share with you a quiet story, a vignette that captures something of Baba Yaga's spirit in a gentler way. This isn't one of the traditional tales, but rather a meditation on her meaning, told in the style of the old stories. Let it wash over you like a lullaby, like the wind through birch trees, like the soft approach of sleep itself. There was once a girl, let's call her Masha, who lived in a small village at the edge of a great forest. Masha was neither beautiful nor plain, neither especially clever nor especially simple. She was just an ordinary girl, the kind you might pass in the market without noticing twice. But Masha had one gift. She could listen. When her grandmother told stories, Masha listened not just to the words between the silences, but to the tone of voice, to the way the story changed slightly each time it was told. When she walked in the forest, she listened to the wind in the trees, to the sound of water over stones, to the songs of birds. When her mother sighed while kneading bread, Masha heard not just the sound, but the feeling behind it, worry about the winter stores, or relief at a sunny day, or simple contentment in the rhythm of work. This gift of listening made Masha's life both richer and harder. She heard things other people missed, and sometimes those things were difficult to bear. She heard the loneliness in the widow's cheerful greeting. She heard the fear in the brave young man's boasting. She heard the love and the frustration mixed together in her mother's voice when she called Masha in for dinner. One autumn, when Masha was 15 years old, her grandmother became very ill. The old woman lay in her bed, growing thinner and quieter each day, and Masha sat beside her, listening to the increasingly long pauses between her breaths. The village women came and went, bringing soups and teas, shaking their heads, whispering that the end was near. One evening, when the house was empty, except for the two of them, the grandmother opened her eyes and looked at Masha with sudden clarity.
"Child," she said in a voice like dried leaves, "I have something to tell you." Masha leaned close to listen. "You know the stories I've told you," the grandmother continued, "about Baba Yaga, about the forest, about the old ways. You've listened more carefully than anyone else ever has. You understand that the stories are true, even though they're not real. Do you know what I mean?" Masha thought about this. "The stories tell truth about how things are," she said slowly, "even if the things in them never happened exactly that way." "Yes," the grandmother smiled. "Exactly yes. Now, listen carefully. When I die, and don't protest, child, it will be soon, you must take 3 things from my chest. There's a wooden comb, very old. There's a small mirror with a silver back. And there's a white handkerchief embroidered with red thread. These belonged to my grandmother, and to her grandmother before her. They're for you now." "But grandmother," Masha began. "Listen," the old woman said firmly. "These are not magical objects like in the stories. They won't turn into rivers or mountains.
They won't grant wishes, but they are precious nonetheless. The comb to keep your thoughts untangled, the mirror to see yourself clearly, not as others see you, the handkerchief for tears, because tears must be shed, but they must also be dried. Do you understand? I think so, Masha said, though she wasn't entirely sure. And one more thing, her grandmother said, her voice fading now. Don't be afraid of the forest. Not all the darkness there is dangerous. Some of it is just the darkness where things grow, where things wait to be born, where things transform from one state to another. The forest is... But the grandmother's eyes had closed and her breathing had softened into sleep. She died 2 days later, peacefully, in the night. Masha grieved as daughters do, but she also remembered her grandmother's instructions. She took the comb, the mirror, and the handkerchief from the old chest where they'd been carefully wrapped in linen. She kept them with her always. The winter that year was long and hard. Food grew scarce. The cold penetrated even the thickest walls. Masha's mother fell ill with a fever and recovered slowly, leaving the household work to Masha. Her father spent long days hunting in the forest, often returning with nothing. The village became a place of thin faces and quiet worry. In the early spring, when snow still covered the ground, but the first hints of thaw were beginning, Masha's younger brother went into the forest to set snares for rabbits, and didn't return. They waited one day, then another. On the third day, Masha's father prepared to search for him, but Masha spoke up. "Let me go," she said. "I know the forest paths. I've listened to the birds and the way the wind moves through different parts of the woods. I think I know where he might have gone." Her father was reluctant, but there was something in Masha's voice, some certainty that made him agree.
Masha took bread and cheese, wrapped herself in her warmest cloak, and tucked her grandmother's 3 gifts in her pocket. Then she walked into the forest. The forest in late winter is a place of profound silence and subtle signs. The snow shows every track. The bare branches reveal the shapes of nests and the secret architecture of tree bark. The cold air carries sounds further than in other seasons. Masha walked slowly, listening, watching, following something she couldn't quite name. Not a trail exactly, but a kind of feeling, an intuition about which way to go. She walked for hours, going deeper into the forest than she'd ever gone before. The trees here were older, thicker, stranger. She began to see things that seemed almost, but not quite right. A tree with bark that looked like scales. A clearing where the snow had melted in a perfect circle. A branch bent into the shape of an arm, pointing. As evening approached and the light began to fade, Masha realized she was lost. She didn't know which direction led home. The forest around her was unfamiliar, no longer the comfortable woods she'd walked in since childhood. For the first time since entering the forest, she felt afraid. That's when she heard it. A low, creaking sound, like a door that needs oiling, like wood rubbing against wood, like something very large moving slowly through the trees ahead. Masha's first instinct was to run, but she remembered her grandmother's words. Don't be afraid of the forest. Not all the darkness there is dangerous. So instead of running, she stood still and listened. The creaking grew louder. Something was approaching through the trees. And then she saw it. A house. A small wooden house, walking on 2 enormous chicken legs, each step slow and deliberate, each movement accompanied by that deep creaking sound. The house was making its way through the forest as casually as Masha herself had walked there. It seemed to be heading somewhere with purpose. Masha watched, frozen not with terror now, but with wonder. The house passed within 20 feet of her, close enough that she could see the smoke rising from its chimney, the frost on its window panes, the worn smoothness of its chicken leg scales. For just a moment, one of the windows seemed to glow with warm light, and Masha thought she glimpsed a figure inside, someone tall and angular, someone turning toward the window as if sensing her presence. Then the house had passed, moving on through the forest, leaving deep three-toed tracks in the snow. Masha stood for a long time in the cold, watching until the house disappeared from view. Then, because she didn't know what else to do, she began to follow its tracks. The chicken-legged house's trail was easy to follow, and somehow Masha felt that this was a path she was meant to take. She walked until full dark had fallen, until she could barely see the tracks in front of her. She was exhausted, freezing, and beginning to despair when she saw, ahead of her, a small light.
As she drew closer, she realized it was a fire. Someone had built a fire in a small clearing, and beside the fire sat a boy, her brother. He looked up at her approach, his face transforming from fear to relief. "Masha, I've been lost for days. I followed a white rabbit so far into the forest and then I couldn't find my way back. I've been wandering in circles, I think. But a few hours ago I found this clearing and decided to stop. I was so cold. I managed to start a fire, and now you're here." Masha hugged him tightly, relief flooding through her. But even as she held her brother, she was looking around the clearing. It was the same clearing where the snow had melted in a perfect circle, and at the edge of the clearing, just barely visible in the firelight, she could see marks in the snow. Three-toed tracks. The chicken-legged house had been here, had perhaps led her here. "Can you find the way home?" her brother asked anxiously. Masha looked up at the sky. The clouds had cleared and stars were visible. She recognized constellations her father had taught her. Yes, she could navigate by them. "I can find the way," she said. "We'll wait for dawn, keep the fire going through the night, and then I'll lead us home." They huddled by the fire, sharing the bread and cheese Masha had brought. As they sat there, Masha pulled out her grandmother's gifts: the comb, the mirror, the handkerchief. In the firelight, she looked at them more closely than she ever had before. The comb's teeth were carved with tiny images: trees, birds, a sun and moon, a figure that might have been a woman or might have been something else. The mirror, when she looked into it, showed her face honestly, tired, worried, but also determined, capable, stronger than she'd known. And the handkerchief, embroidered with red thread, showed a pattern she now recognized: a house on two legs, surrounded by trees, with a sun, moon, and stars above it. "What are those?" her brother asked drowsily. "Grandmother's gifts," Masha said softly. I think they were meant to help me when I needed them most, to keep my thoughts clear when I was confused, to help me see myself truly when I doubted myself, and to remind me that tears and difficulties are part of life, but they can be endured and dried." "Did they work?" her brother asked drowsily. Masha thought about this. The gifts hadn't magically solved anything, but having them with her, remembering her grandmother's words, had helped her stay calm when she was lost, had given her the courage to stand still instead of running when the chicken-legged house appeared, had helped her trust her instincts and follow the tracks that led her to her brother. "Yes," she said. "I think they did." They made it home the next day, tired but safe. The village rejoiced at the brothers' return. Life continued its normal rhythms, and eventually spring truly arrived, bringing with it new grass and green leaves and the songs of returning birds. Masha told no one about the chicken-legged house, not even her mother.
Some things are meant to be kept close, held privately, treasured in silence. But sometimes, when she walked in the forest, she would pause,
and listened very carefully. And once or twice, far in the distance, she thought she heard that distinctive creaking sound, like a large door that needs oiling, like wood rubbing against wood, like something moving through the trees on legs that were never meant to walk. She never saw the house again, but she kept her grandmother's gifts with her always, and whenever anyone in the village needed help, when someone was lost or confused or grieving or afraid, they found themselves coming to Masha. She couldn't explain how, but she seemed to know how to help them find their way, how to help them see themselves clearly, how to help them understand that difficulties could be endured. It's like you learned from Baba Yaga herself, an old woman once said to her admiringly. Masha smiled, but said nothing. Perhaps she had. In her way, perhaps her grandmother had been passing on lessons that went back many generations, back to a time when the boundaries between stories and reality were more permeable, when the forest was darker and deeper, and the old ways were still remembered. Or perhaps Baba Yaga was never one particular person, but rather a role, a function, a kind of wisdom that gets passed down from grandmother to granddaughter through the centuries, changing form, but never quite disappearing, like a house that walks through the forest, always moving but never quite leaving, always there when someone needs to find it, always ready to test and to teach those brave enough to seek it out.
She felt as if she was failing somehow, as if she wasn't truly a weaver, but merely someone who copied what others had created. She felt hollow, incomplete, like a vessel with nothing inside. One night, Katya had a dream. In the dream, she was walking in a birch forest. The white bark of the trees glowed in moonlight. Everything was silver and shadow, beautiful and eerie. She walked without knowing where she was going, but she wasn't afraid. She felt as if she was being called, drawn forward by something she couldn't see but could sense. In a clearing ahead, she saw a house. It stood on two enormous chicken legs, and as she watched, it slowly turned to face her, its windows like eyes watching her approach. The door opened, and warm light spilled out into the cold night. Come in, called a voice from inside. I've been expecting you." In the dream, Katya walked up to the house and entered. Inside, she found a figure sitting at a loom. The figure was old, impossibly old, with long gray hair and hands that were more like birds' claws than human fingers. But those hands moved over the loom with incredible speed and grace, weaving a cloth unlike anything Katya had ever seen. The pattern in the cloth seemed to contain everything: stars and trees, birds and beasts, day and night, joy and sorrow, birth and death. It was beautiful and terrible, simple and infinitely complex. Katya stood watching, mesmerized. "You want to create," the old woman said, without turning from her work, "but you're afraid." "I don't know how," Katya whispered. "I only know the old patterns." "The old patterns are important," the old woman said. "They carry wisdom, but they're not everything. They're the foundation, not the whole house. You've built a strong foundation. Now you must learn to build upon it." "But how?" Katya asked. "How do I create something new?" The old woman finally turned to look at her. Her eyes were dark and deep, and Katya felt as if she was looking into wells that went down and down forever. "You must be willing to weave yourself into the cloth," the old woman said. "Not just your skill, but yourself, your joys and your sorrows, your fears and your hopes, your secrets and your truths. The old patterns are safe because they come outside you. Creating is dangerous because it requires you to put what's inside you out into the world where others can see it, judge it, perhaps reject it. Are you willing to take that risk? You must put everything into the cloth, even the parts you're ashamed of, even the parts that frighten you." She turned back to her loom and continued weaving. "I'll show you something," she said. As Katya watched, the old woman began to weave a section of cloth that was dark, tangled, disturbing. The pattern seemed to writhe and twist, showing images of loss and pain and fear. It was not beautiful in any conventional sense, but somehow it was powerful. It was true. Then the old woman's shuttle moved, and she began to weave next to the dark section. This part was bright, full of light and hope and joy. But the bright section didn't replace the dark one. Instead, they existed side by side, and where they met, something extraordinary happened. The contrast made each section more intense, more real. The brightness was brighter because of the darkness beside it. The darkness was more profound because of the light it touched. "This is the secret," the old woman said. "You must weave it all, light and dark, joy and sorrow, strength and weakness. Only then will you create something true. The old patterns are beautiful, but they're only one note. You must learn to weave the full song." Katya woke from the dream with her heart pounding, tears on her face, though she didn't know why she was crying. The dream stayed with her through the day, vivid and present, more real than reality itself. That evening, she went to her loom. Instead of starting with one of the familiar patterns, she sat for a long time with her hands resting on the warp threads, feeling the tension in them, the potential. Then slowly, she began to weave. She thought of her childhood, of running through fields in summer, and she wove that joy into the cloth. She thought of her mother's death, of the hollow ache of loss, and she wove that sorrow in beside the joy. She thought of her fears, her doubts, and her small secret hopes, and she wove them all in, her shuttle flying back and forth, the pattern emerging thread by thread. It was not easy. Several times she wanted to stop, wanted to tear out what she'd woven and start over with a safe, familiar pattern. The cloth she was creating was strange. It didn't look like anything anyone else had ever woven. It was uniquely hers, and that was terrifying. But she kept weaving, remembering the dream, remembering the old woman's words. She wove late into the night, and when she finally stopped, exhausted, she looked at what she'd created. The cloth was unlike anything she'd ever seen. It was wild and orderly at once, dark and light, chaotic and structured. It told a story, though she couldn't have put that story into words. It was, she realized, a cloth of truth. Her truth. It wasn't perfect or safe or conventionally beautiful, but it was alive in a way her other weaving had never been. Over the following weeks and months, Katya continued to weave new patterns. Some were beautiful, some were strange, some were unsettling, but they were hers.
She wove her life into cloth, all the messy, complicated, contradictory reality of being human. And slowly she became known for this unique weaving that somehow captured something essential about existence itself. People came from far away to buy her cloth, or simply to see it. Many didn't understand it. Some actively disliked it. But others would stand before her weavings and weep, recognizing something of themselves in the patterns, feeling seen and understood in a way they'd never experienced before. One day, a very old woman came to see Katya's weavings. She was bent and thin, and she leaned heavily on a walking stick. She looked at the cloth for a long time without speaking. Finally, she turned to Katya and smiled, showing iron teeth. "You learned the lesson," she said simply. Then she left, walking away into the forest, and though Katya watched from her doorway, the old woman seemed to vanish among the birch trees, as if she'd never been there at all. That night, Katya had another dream. She was walking in the birch forest again, but this time she wasn't looking for the chicken-legged house. She was simply walking, comfortable and unafraid. The forest was beautiful in its wildness, in its mixture of light and shadow, growth and decay, life and death. It was whole, complete, true. And somewhere in the distance, Katya heard a sound like a large door that needs oiling, like wood rubbing against wood. She smiled in her sleep,
understanding at last that Baba Yaga wasn't just a character in old stories. She was a teacher who appeared when someone was ready to learn, who challenged people to face their fears, to embrace their complexity, to weave their whole selves into the world instead of hiding behind safe patterns and borrowed wisdom. When Katya woke, she went immediately to her loom and began to weave a new piece. This one would be her masterwork, she decided. She would put everything into it, all her skill, all her truth, all her life. And if people didn't understand it, that was all right. She understood it. She had learned to be herself, completely and courageously, and that was worth more than any praise or profit. The cloth she wove became legendary in time, passed down through generations as an example of the weaver's art at its finest. People who saw it said it seemed alive, that you could stare at it for hours and always see something new, something deeper. They said it was like looking into the heart of existence itself. But the truth was simpler than that. Katya had simply woven honestly. She had put her whole self into the cloth, light and dark, joy and sorrow, strength and weakness. She had learned what Baba Yaga teaches all who are brave enough to seek her out, that wholeness comes not from perfection, but from embracing all of what you are, that creation requires vulnerability, and that the greatest magic is simply truth, woven into whatever form your hands can make. Part 12, a final vignette, the path through the forest.
As this long night draws toward its close, as you drift closer to sleep, let me share one last quiet story with you, a final meditation on Baba Yaga and what she represents for those who encounter her in whatever form she takes. There was once a person, neither young nor old, neither man nor woman in the way those terms usually matter, who felt lost. Not lost in the sense of not knowing where they were physically, but lost in the deeper sense. They didn't know who they were, what they wanted, where their life was going. They felt hollow, incomplete, as if they were waiting for something to begin, but didn't know what that something might be. This person lived a normal life in a normal place, doing normal things. They went to work, came home, made dinner, watched television, went to bed. They had friends, or at least acquaintances. They had family, though those relationships were complicated. They had hobbies and interests. From the outside, their life looked fine, but inside, they felt empty. One autumn evening, walking home from work along a familiar street, this person noticed something strange. Between two buildings where no alley had ever been before, there was a path. It was barely visible, just a gap in the urban landscape, but it was definitely there, and it seemed to lead toward darkness, toward wildness, toward something that was decidedly not city. The person stood looking at this impossible path for a long time. Every logical thought said to ignore it, to continue home, to dismiss it as a trick of the light or stress-induced hallucination. But something deeper, something wordless and insistent said to follow it. So they did. The path led between the buildings, but within just a few steps, the city sounds faded away. The person looked back and could barely see the street they'd come from. Ahead, the path continued through what had become a forest. Not a city park, not a managed green space, but a real forest. Old and wild and vast. The person kept walking. They had no map, no supplies, no plan. They probably should have been afraid, but they weren't. Or rather, they were afraid, but the fear felt right somehow. Felt like waking up after a long sleep, like coming alive after being numb. They walked until it was fully dark, and then they saw ahead of them a fire burning in a clearing. They approached cautiously and found, sitting by the fire, an old woman. The woman was dressed in clothing from no particular era, and her face was lined with age, but also ageless, as if she'd always been old and always would be. "Sit," the old woman said, gesturing to a spot across the fire.
You look lost." "I am," the person admitted, sitting down. The fire's warmth was welcome. "I don't know where I'm going." "No one does." "That's not the real problem. The real problem is that you don't know where you've been. You don't know who you are. You're walking through your life like a ghost, present, but not really there. Aren't you tired of that?" The person thought about this for a...
"Yes," they said finally. "I'm very tired of that." "Good," the old woman said. "Tiredness is the beginning of change. When you're tired enough of how things are, you become willing to let them be different. But change is not comfortable. Change is not safe. Change requires going through difficult places, facing things you've been avoiding, becoming vulnerable. Are you willing?" "I don't know," the person said honestly. "I don't know what you're asking me to do." The old woman smiled, and her teeth gleamed in the firelight. "I'm asking you to walk through the forest, to keep going deeper, to face what you find there. The forest contains everything you've hidden from yourself, all the parts of you that you've denied or suppressed or forgotten, all the feelings you wouldn't let yourself feel, all the truths you didn't want to see. The forest is dark because you've kept it dark, but you can't go around it. You can only go through it." "What if I get lost?" the person asked. "You're already lost," the old woman pointed out. "What you mean is, what if you don't find your way back to the life you had before? And that's possible. Likely, even. The person who goes into this forest will not be the same person who comes out the other side. That old life, that empty shell of existence, you probably won't be able to return to it even if you want to. Change is not reversible. You can't unknow what you learn in the darkness." The person sat silent for a long time, watching the fire, feeling the night air on their face. Finally they said, "If I don't do this, if I turn back now and return to my old life, what happens?" "You continue as you were," the old woman said with a shrug. "Hollow, going through the motions, safe and empty. Many people choose that. Most people choose that. There's no judgment in it. The forest doesn't call everyone, and not everyone who hears the call chooses to answer. You could go back right now, return to your apartment, your job, your routine, and it would be fine. Your life would continue exactly as it has been." "But," the person asked, sensing there was more. "But you'll always know," the old woman said softly. "You'll always know that there was a moment when you could have chosen differently. You'll always wonder what was waiting for you in the forest, what you might have become if you'd been brave enough to walk forward instead of turning back. That wondering might be easier to bear than the forest itself, or it might be harder. Only you can decide." The person looked into the darkness beyond the fire's light. The forest waited there, patient and infinite, full of unknown dangers and unknown gifts. They thought about their life, about the hollow feeling that had brought them here. They thought about continuing that life forever, safe but empty, never knowing what else might have been possible. "I'll go forward," they said at last. The old woman nodded as if she'd known all along what the answer would be. "Then sleep now. Rest by the fire tonight. In the morning, you'll continue your journey. I'll give you 3 things to take with you." The person laid down by the fire, wrapped in their coat, and despite everything, the strangeness of the situation, the impossibility of a forest existing in the middle of a city, the presence of this mysterious old woman, they fell almost immediately into deep, dreamless sleep. When they woke, dawn was breaking through the trees. The old woman was awake, sitting by the remains of the fire, which she had kept burning through the night. She handed the person 3 objects. The first was a candle, small and white, unlit. "This is for when the darkness becomes overwhelming," the old woman said.
Light it, and it will show you one step ahead, just enough to keep moving, but only one step. Don't expect it to illuminate everything. The forest must be experienced, not observed from a distance. The second was a small knife with a bone handle. This is for cutting through things that bind you, the old woman said. Old stories you've told yourself that aren't true, expectations others have placed on you that aren't yours to carry, connections that drain rather than nourish. The knife is sharp. Use it carefully, but use it when needed. The third was a seed, small and ordinary looking. This is for planting, the old woman said. When you reach the other side of the forest, when you emerge into whatever light awaits you there, plant the seed. It will grow into whatever you need most, but you won't know what that is until it grows. You must trust it. The person took the 3 gifts and put them carefully in their pockets. "Will I see you again?" they asked. The old woman smiled her iron-toothed smile. "You'll see me whenever you need to see me," she said. "I'm always in the forest, and the forest is always there, even when you can't see it. Now go. Walk forward. Don't look back." So the person walked forward into the forest, leaving the fire and the old woman behind. The path continued ahead of them, winding between ancient trees, sometimes clear, sometimes nearly vanishing, but always there if they looked carefully. As they walked, they encountered many things. Memories they'd forgotten rose up around them like ghosts. A moment of childhood shame, a grief they'd never fully processed, an anger they'd suppressed, a joy they'd been too afraid to fully feel, a dream they'd abandoned, a truth they'd denied. Each encounter was difficult, sometimes painful, but the person faced them, named them, felt them fully instead of pushing them away as they'd done before.
These vines, they realized, were woven from old obligations, old guilt, old stories about who they were supposed to be and what they were supposed to do. They took out the knife and began to cut, carefully at first, then more confidently. The vines fell away, and the path opened before them. They walked for what might have been days, or months, or years. Time in the forest didn't work the way time worked outside. They ate berries and drank from streams. They slept under trees. They kept walking. Gradually, they began to notice changes in themselves. The hollow feeling was fading, being replaced by something solid, something real. They were becoming more present in their own life, more aware, more alive. The person who had entered the forest, sleepwalking through an empty existence, was falling away like old skin. Someone new was emerging. Finally, after a journey that felt both endless and instantaneous, they saw light ahead. Not the dappled sunlight that filtered through the forest canopy, but clear, bright, open light. They walked toward it, and the trees thinned, and then they stepped out of the forest into a meadow. The meadow was beautiful. Grass swayed in a gentle breeze. Flowers bloomed. A stream ran through it, clear and bright. And beyond the meadow, they could see what looked like a village, or perhaps a city, or perhaps something they had no name for yet, a place they could go, a life they could live, a future that was now possible because they had walked through the forest instead of turning back. They remembered the seed. They knelt in the meadow grass, dug a small hole with their hands, and planted the seed. They covered it with earth and watered it with water from the stream. Then they stood and looked around at this new landscape, this new possibility. They didn't know what would grow from the seed. They didn't know exactly what their new life would look like. But they were no longer hollow. They were no longer lost, or at least not in the way they had been before. They had faced the darkness inside themselves, had cut away what needed cutting, had followed the small light of the candle through the deepest shadows, and had emerged whole. Behind them, the forest remained.
dark and vast and mysterious. But it was no longer frightening. It was simply there, a place they had traveled through, a teacher they had learned from. And somewhere deep in those trees, they knew, an old woman sat by a fire, waiting for the next traveler who would be brave enough, or desperate enough, or curious enough to leave the safe, known path and walk into the wilderness to discover who they really were. The person smiled.
They turned toward the village or city or whatever lay ahead, and they began walking toward it. No longer a ghost moving through someone else's life, but a real person living their own story, whatever that story would turn out to be. And in the forest behind them, though they couldn't see it, the old woman smiled too, her iron teeth gleaming. Another one had made it through. Another one had been brave enough to transform. She tended the fire and waited, patient as always, for the next person who would need what the forest teaches, what she guards, what can only be learned by walking through darkness toward an uncertain light. Part 13. Baba Yaga in Modern Times. While Baba Yaga's origins lie in ancient folk beliefs and her most famous stories were collected in the 19th century, she has never faded from cultural consciousness. Instead, she has continued to evolve and appear in new forms, adapted for modern media while retaining her essential mysterious character. In Russian and Slavic popular culture, Baba Yaga remains a well-known figure. Children still grow up hearing her stories. She appears in children's books and animated films and television shows. Modern Russian animation studios have created numerous adaptations of traditional Baba Yaga tales, some frightening, some comedic, but all recognizably her. Interestingly, as these traditional stories have been adapted for children in the Soviet era and post-Soviet Russia, Baba Yaga has sometimes become more of a comic figure than a frightening one. In some animated films and children's stories, she's portrayed as grumpy and difficult, but ultimately harmless, even befriending the young protagonists. This softening reflects changing cultural attitudes and the desire to make traditional folklore accessible and non-threatening to young children. But Baba Yaga has also spread far beyond the Slavic world. In Western popular culture, she appears in books, films, video games, and television shows, often introduced to audiences who have no direct connection to Slavic heritage. This international spread began in earnest in the late 20th century and has continued to grow. In literature, Baba Yaga has been featured in countless works. Fantasy novels frequently borrow her as a character or use elements of her mythology. The popular comic book series Hellboy by Mike Mignola features Baba Yaga as a recurring character, powerful and dangerous with her chicken-legged hut and her mortar and pestle. In these comics, she is portrayed as ancient and enormously powerful, someone even Hellboy treats with great caution and respect. Young adult fiction has also embraced Baba Yaga. Multiple book series have reimagined her for modern readers, sometimes portraying her sympathetically as a misunderstood figure, sometimes maintaining her dangerous ambiguity. These retellings often explore her character more deeply than traditional fairy tales could, giving her backstory, motivations, emotional depth. In the 21st century, Baba Yaga has appeared in video games, where players might encounter her as a boss to fight, a quest giver who provides missions, or an ambiguous figure who might help or hinder depending on the player's choices. The game Rise of the Tomb Raider featured an entire expansion called Baba Yaga: The Temple of the Witch, where the protagonist must venture into a dangerous forest to confront Baba Yaga. A recent indie video game called Rekka takes a completely different approach, casting the player as someone learning from Baba Yaga, building their own chicken-legged hut and practicing witchcraft under her mentorship. This game portrays Baba Yaga not as a villain, but as a teacher passing on her knowledge to a new generation. Perhaps one of the most interesting modern appearances of Baba Yaga is in the John Wick film franchise, where Baba Yaga becomes the nickname of the protagonist, a feared assassin. The films even include dialogue explaining that John Wick is the one you send to kill the Baba Yaga. He is death itself, the force that even the monster fears. While this usage doesn't directly engage with Slavic folklore, it shows how the name Baba Yaga has become synonymous with primal, unstoppable danger in popular imagination. In contemporary literature aimed at adults, writers have used Baba Yaga as a lens for exploring themes of aging, female power, outsider status, and the wisdom that comes from embracing, rather than denying, the darker aspects of existence. Author Catherine M. Valente's work Deathless reimagines Russian folklore, including Baba Yaga, in the context of 20th century Soviet history. Other writers have placed Baba Yaga in modern settings, exploring what this ancient figure might mean in contemporary contexts. The feminist reclamation of Baba Yaga has been particularly significant. Writers and scholars have re-examined her stories through a feminist lens, seeing her not as a villain, but as a powerful woman who refuses to conform to patriarchal expectations. In this reading, Baba Yaga becomes an icon of female autonomy, of the power that comes from living according to your own rules rather than society's dictates. Artists and illustrator communities have also embraced Baba Yaga, creating countless visual interpretations of her. Some depict her traditionally as a frightening hag in a chicken-legged hut. Others reimagine her as younger, more beautiful, or more abstract. The chicken-legged hut in particular has inspired architectural drawings and fantasy art, with artists imagining what such a structure might look like in various styles and settings. In academic circles, Baba Yaga has been the subject of numerous papers, books, and conferences exploring her psychological significance, her role in cultural identity, her evolution over time, and her continuing relevance. Folklorists, anthropologists, literary scholars, and psychologists have all found rich material in examining this complex figure.
What's particularly interesting about Baba Yaga's modern adaptations is how they maintain her essential ambiguity, even while updating her for contemporary audiences. Whether she appears in a video game, a comic book, a novel, or a film, she tends to retain her unpredictable nature, her connection to forests and wilderness, her role as both potential threat and potential helper, her association with thresholds and transformations. These core characteristics translate across mediums and cultures because they touch on something universal in the human experience. The chicken-legged hut, too, has become iconic, appearing in modern fantasy art and architecture, even when Baba Yaga herself isn't present. The image of a house that can walk, that can turn to face you or turn away, that exists on the boundary between civilization and wilderness, this image resonates with modern audiences just as it did with audiences centuries ago. It speaks to our sense that the familiar can become strange, that homes can be unstable, that nothing is quite as secure as we'd like to believe. In spiritual and neo-pagan communities, particularly those that draw on European folk traditions, Baba Yaga has been invoked as a goddess or powerful spiritual entity. Some practitioners work with her as an archetype in ritual and meditation, calling on her energy for transformation, for finding strength, for navigating difficult transitions. These modern spiritual practices often draw on traditional folklore while adapting it to contemporary spiritual needs. There's something about Baba Yaga that continues to speak to people across cultures and eras. Perhaps it's her refusal to be simply good or simply evil, her insistence on complexity in a world that often demands simplification. Perhaps it's the way she represents older, wilder forms of feminine power that mainstream culture still finds threatening. Perhaps it's her connection to nature, to the untamed forest, at a time when wilderness is increasingly vanished and people feel disconnected from the natural world. Perhaps it's her role as a figure of transformation at a time when many people feel stuck, when the need for change is urgent, but the path forward is unclear. Whatever the reason, Baba Yaga endures. She walks through the forests of our collective imagination, riding in her mortar, sweeping away her tracks, appearing when least expected, offering challenges that transform those brave enough to face them.
She is alive now, as she was 1,000 years ago, and she will likely continue her journey for centuries to come. Part 14. The Enduring Mystery. Final Reflections.
Baba Yaga cannot be fully contained by any interpretation, no matter how thorough. She exceeds every attempt to explain her, slips through every net of meaning we try to cast over her. This is not a failure of understanding. This is her gift to us, the reminder that some things should remain mysterious, that not everything needs to be explained, dissected, rationalized. In our modern world, with its emphasis on clarity, certainty, and control, Baba Yaga offers us something increasingly rare: permission to not know, permission to be uncertain, permission to encounter mystery and let it remain mysterious. When we meet her in stories, we're not meant to solve her like a puzzle. We're meant to experience her, to be changed by that experience, to carry something of her wilderness back with us into our ordered lives. The chicken-legged hut that turns and walks and appears where it chooses is the perfect embodiment of this. You cannot plan to find Baba Yaga. You cannot schedule an appointment with transformation. The hut appears when it appears, turns to face you when you speak the proper words, or doesn't. All you can do is walk through the forest with respect and readiness, and if the time is right, if you're ready for what she offers, the hut will be there. The Fence of Bones reminds us that real transformation involves real risk. Not everyone who seeks Baba Yaga survives the encounter. Not everyone should attempt the journey into the forest. There's wisdom in knowing your limits, in choosing safety when safety is what you need. But there's also courage in stepping past the fence when the time comes, in facing the possibility of failure or death, because the alternative, continuing as you are, has become unbearable. The three riders, white, red, and black, circling eternally through their appointed rounds, remind us that some forces are beyond our control. Day comes whether we're ready for it or not. The sun climbs to its height regardless of our plans. Night falls when it falls. And Baba Yaga, who commands these riders, who exists in relation to time but outside its normal flow, reminds us that there are powers in the universe far greater than our small human will. This is humbling. It's also liberating. When we accept that we're not in control of everything, when we acknowledge forces greater than ourselves, we can stop exhausting ourselves trying to manage the unmanageable. We can focus on what we actually can influence, how we face what comes, how we respond to challenge, whether we approach the unknown with respect or with arrogance. Baba Yaga, in all her complexity and contradiction, teaches us to embrace the fullness of existence, light and dark, creation and destruction, help and hindrance, kindness and cruelty, life and death. She refuses the either-or thinking that wants to divide the world into simple categories. She insists on both and, on the truth that reality contains multitudes, that we ourselves contain multitudes. This is uncomfortable.
It's easier to believe in simple villains and pure heroes, clear right and obvious wrong. But life isn't like that, and Baba Yaga knows it. She forces us to grow up, to see complexity, to understand that the same force can nurture and destroy, that the same person can help and harm, that transformation requires breaking down as well as building up. And so she remains, year after year, century after century, walking through our stories, our dreams, our imaginations. The old woman in the forest, the witch in the chicken-legged hut, the teacher who tests through trial, the crone who knows the secrets of death and therefore guards the gates of new life, the trickster who subverts expectations, the goddess in exile,
still powerful despite being forgotten. The wilderness personified, the mystery that refuses to be solved. She is Baba Yaga, and she waits in the forest for those who need her, as she has always waited, as she will always wait. Patient, powerful, unpredictable, dangerous, wise, terrible, transformative, true. Conclusion. The forest waits, the stories continue. So here we are, dear traveler, truly at the end now of this long night's journey through the world of Baba Yaga. You've stayed with me through all these hours, through ancient origins and powerful symbols, through regional variations and complete tales, through gentle vignettes that carried you deeper into the night, through explorations of her role as teacher and trickster, through her transformation into modern media, through reflections on her enduring mystery. I hope you found what you needed here. Perhaps it was knowledge about Slavic folklore and the rich tradition of storytelling that has kept Baba Yaga alive for so many centuries. Perhaps it was comfort in her complexity, in the permission she gives us to be complicated ourselves, to contain contradictions, to be both strong and vulnerable, both afraid and courageous. Perhaps it was simply a voice to accompany you through the night, words to focus on as your mind slowed and your body relaxed, stories to carry you gently towards sleep and dreams. Whatever you found here, whatever you take with you from this journey, I'm glad you came. I'm glad you were willing to step into the forest with me, to meet Baba Yaga in all her forms, to let these old stories speak to something deep inside you. As I said at the beginning, though it seems so long ago now, the forest that Baba Yaga inhabits is not just a place in old Russian landscapes or ancient fairy tales. The forest is everywhere and always. It's the unknown territory we all must eventually enter when life demands that we change, grow, transform into something new. It's the dark night of the soul, the difficult passage, the time of uncertainty and fear and possibility. Baba Yaga is always there, in that forest, waiting. Not because she's real in any literal sense, though to those who need her she is very real indeed, but because she represents something that is real and necessary and eternal.
She is the guardian of thresholds, the one who tests us when we're ready to change. She is the teacher through ordeal who pushes us to discover strength we didn't know we had. She is the wild feminine wisdom that refuses to be domesticated or made safe or reduced to something simple and understandable. She is the reminder that transformation requires descent into darkness before ascent into new light. She is the acknowledgement that death and endings are necessary for rebirth and new beginnings. She is the truth that the journey matters more than the destination, that being tested and challenged is how we grow, that easy paths lead nowhere worth going. You may never see a house on chicken legs walking through the woods. You may never encounter an old woman with iron teeth sitting by a fire in a clearing. But if you live long enough, if you remain open enough, if you're brave enough or desperate enough or simply human enough, you will find yourself in the forest. You will face the impossible task. You will stand before the fence of bones and have to decide whether to turn back or step forward. And in those moments, I hope you'll remember these stories. Remember that others have walked this path before you. Remember that the forest, for all its dangers, is also where transformation happens, where the old self dies and the new self is born. Remember that the gifts you carry, your courage, your kindness, your wisdom, however small it may seem, are enough if you trust them. Remember that help often comes from unexpected sources, that there's magic in connecting to something deeper than your small self, and that the way through the forest is forward, not back. Remember that Baba Yaga is not simple, that she might seem like an enemy but might be the best teacher you'll ever have, that her harshness might be exactly what pushes you to discover your true strength.
Remember that fear is often the doorway to the most important transformations. Remember that mystery doesn't need to be solved to be valuable. Remember that you are more complex than you know, more capable than you believe, and more resilient than you can imagine. The chicken-legged hut is still walking through the forests of our imagination, still turning to face those who speak the proper words, still offering challenges and tests and impossible tasks to those brave enough to enter. The three riders still circle, marking dawn, noon, and midnight, the endless cycle of time. The fence of bones still stands as both warning and promise. Many have come before you, many have been transformed here, and you too can be transformed if you're willing to face what waits beyond the threshold. And somewhere, in the deep places where stories live and ancient wisdom waits, Baba Yaga tends her fire. She grinds her herbs in her mortar.
She watches with those dark, fathomless eyes for the next person who will need what only she can teach. That life is not simple, that growth requires difficulty, that transformation is possible, and that becoming fully yourself requires walking through the forest of your fears toward an uncertain but promising light. Sleep now, dear traveler. Let these stories settle into your dreams. Let Baba Yaga walk through your sleeping mind, neither demon nor saint, but something older and wilder and truer than either. Let the forest be present in your rest, the safe darkness where things grow and change and transform. And when you wake, whenever that is, know that you carry these stories with you now. They're part of you, woven into your thoughts, into your understanding of the world, into your own journey through life's forests. She watches with those dark, fathomless eyes for the next person who will need what only she can teach, that life is not simple, that growth requires difficulty, that transformation is possible, and that becoming fully yourself requires walking through the forest of your fears toward an uncertain but promising light. Sleep now, dear traveler. Let these stories settle into your dreams. Let Baba Yaga walk through your sleeping mind, neither demon nor saint, but something older and wilder and truer than either. Let the forest be present in your rest, the safe darkness where things grow and change and transform. And when you wake, whenever that is, know that you carry these stories with you now. They're part of you, woven into your thoughts, into your understanding of the world, into your own journey through life's forests. You've walked with Baba Yaga tonight, and that changes you, even if only a little, even if only in ways you won't fully understand until much later, when you find yourself in your own forest, facing your own impossible task, discovering your own unexpected strength. The forest waits. The hut walks. The old woman sits by her fire, patient and terrible and wise. And the stories continue, passed from generation to generation, from voice to voice, from the sleeping to the waking and back again, keeping alive something essential about what it means to be human, to face difficulty, to transform, to survive, to become. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. Thank you for listening to these stories, for letting them into your mind and heart. Thank you for your patience, your curiosity, your willingness to journey deep into the night with me. May your dreams be deep and restorative. May your rest be true and healing. May you wake refreshed and ready for whatever journey lies ahead. And may you remember, when you find yourself in the forest of your own life's challenges, that others have walked there before you, that stories light the way, and that even in the darkest part of the woods, transformation is possible. Even in the deepest darkness, there is wisdom. Even when you feel most alone, you carry with you all the stories, all the strength, all the magic of those who came before. If you enjoyed this journey into Slavic folklore and the world of Baba Yaga, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more restful explorations of mythology, folklore, and the ancient stories that still speak to us across the centuries. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows me to continue creating long-form, thoughtful content for those seeking knowledge, comfort, and connection through the power of story. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and sweet dreams, dear travelers. The forest is always there when you need it, and so is the old woman who guards its mysteries. You are braver than you know, wiser than you think, and more capable of transformation than you can imagine. Good night.